Good afternoon, everybody. It's Wednesday, February 10th, my favorite day of the year. Delegate Griffith, you have the first bill today. We have 7 education bills, and we're starting with you, House Bill 716.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good afternoon, Chairwoman Kaiser, Vice Chairman Washington, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Mike Griffith, and I urge a favorable report on House Bill 716. This bill has been cross-filed in the Senate by Senator Peters. This past year, we've seen and heard from parents, like my wife and I, from every corner of the state and every demographic, facing difficulties trying to get independent educational evaluations or IEPs for their children. These evaluations are essential for special needs children and children with learning disabilities to get the customized education plan they need. It's crucial that these evaluations are done in accordance with federal guidelines, but more importantly, are critical in making sure our children are on the right path to progress. Some school districts have made these evaluations totally virtual. Some have pushed them back altogether, and in some cases are over a year behind, which means these children are over a year behind. These evaluations that are essential to be done in person are essential to be done in person. What this bill would do is protect these students' right for the IEP. So if a school is closed and cannot provide these evaluations in the time required, the school district would then pay for the parent to obtain an evaluation for their child from a third-party evaluator for those families who choose to do so. The IEP process, in many cases, is a primary tool in helping so many children get the constitutionally protected education these children desperately need. In this area, shortcuts are shortcomings, and they fail our children. Therefore, it's imperative that parents are given the resources to obtain these evaluations. Considering this, I urge a favorable report on House Bill 716.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for Delegate Griffith? All right, thank you, Delegate. I'm going to call up 2 witnesses. Well, but there's 3. I'll start with Lori Scott.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak today in regards to this this House bill, which I'm in favor of. This bill is really important to us as a panel of advocates because there were hundreds of students early on in the pandemic, unfortunately, who were left kind of hanging in need of an evaluation to determine whether or not they were eligible for special education services. No one anticipated, of course, that this was going to be this long, and we certainly understand that. But it's hard enough when families have requested it before the pandemic started and school closed. But even moving forward since then, we have had families, hundreds of families in each district, request evaluations that potentially have not been done. I know in my district, someone's going to talk about the numbers, but we are very, very high. And there are some agreements that the districts have asked families to sign that say things like an additional 90 days after students return to brick and mortar buildings or face-to-face assessments are able to be implemented to continue the process. So we are very concerned about some of these issues with our districts who are pushing out even longer the evaluations. So a lot of kids started this school year without being eligible, without having an eligibility diagnosis, and whether or not accommodations or they needed specially designed instruction was yet to be determined. This is very harmful to students in need of specially designed instruction and accommodations as they wait for diagnosis and appropriate interventions. So I hope that you will support this and force districts to follow the federal statutes of 60 days to do the evaluation from the signed consent by parents and ensure that students get evaluated, get an IEP, get a 504, and begin then to get their free and appropriate education so that they're successful. If districts are unable to evaluate the student, we get that. But give us an opportunity to go out in the community and get the IEE so that kids can get the appropriate interventions, and it should be at the district's expense. So I hope for your favorable report in this, and so we could stop the potential delay for special education services to students who desperately need them. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
We're going to go next to Andy Culp with the ARC. Andy or Ande? Okay, we'll go to Ashley Van Cleef.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a former special education teacher, former school administrator, former school system attorney, and now I'm an attorney who represents parents of students with disabilities. And so as we look at this bill, I'm certainly here in support of that. I recognize, having been a former teacher, how difficult this is as teachers are trying to move forward with these processes. But what I'm seeing from the parent side of the table, and I participate in hundreds of IEP meetings, and I have since the pandemic started, is that it's the district level administrators that are telling schools that they can't move forward, that there's nothing they can do. And then they're asking them to waive their rights to those evaluations. And so as we look at moving forward with this bill, we see students who are denied not only access to the evaluations that are critical to move forward and achieve services, we're seeing those students now being denied access to the school services. So as our students are beginning to come back in the hybrid model, the students that are coming back and receiving services are our students who are receiving special education supports. So we have this group that's in limbo that's been denied evaluations for a year's time, who now are continuing to be denied evaluations and now being denied access to those support services that they need so desperately. So as we come here today, I urge you to support this bill so that we can help get families the supports that they need. There's only so many families that us as advocates and attorneys can support. And there's so many families out there that are just desperately waiting, and they don't understand their rights in the sense that they're told by the school system they can't do anything else. And they think that that's the end of the story. When in reality, we know that the federal guidance hasn't changed, our state guidance hadn't changed, and they have a right to evaluations. We know that private evaluators are evaluating students, and they can give us those results, and we can get to the IEP table, and we can get students the supports that they need so desperately. But without your support, we're in a position of limbo, and we continue to be, especially for those families that cannot advocate on behalf of themselves. So I ask you to support this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions for the panel or for these witnesses? Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you for noticing. I was flipping around a little bit. The fiscal note is sort of silent on the cost of these evaluations. Do we have any sense of what they would be per evaluation? Because it's at the cost of the system. And I know that, Griffith, you said it was in the situation like the pandemic, but if I'm reading the bill, it just says if the parent disagrees. So that's a little bit broader than just that they had trouble getting one. So those are two different questions, financial and policy. I wonder if anyone can take those up.
I can just lend some, and I think Ashley can probably talk a little bit. Remember too, Delegate Ebersol, and good to see you, that not every kid is going to get a full educational evaluation, because you might just need an IEP for speech and language, or you might just need orientation and mobility as you transition to adult world. So not every kid needs a full educational evaluation, but certainly, as we're looking at eligibility and whether they need an IEP or 504, we have to go heavy in a little bit in the special education. So Ashley, can you talk a little bit about what those numbers look like? And the question is, not every family is going to want their kid at any point to go in the community. We would rather certainly that the school evaluate them, and that's what the goal is here.
Sure. So whenever you think about private evaluations, you can see those range from $500 if you're talking about a speech language or an occupational therapy evaluation, to going to a full neuropsychological evaluation, which can be about $2,800, $3,000, depending upon the provider. There is a huge spectrum within there. And again, it depends upon the assessments that are needed. As we get to an IEP table and we talk about what is it we really need, we come up with diagnostic questions. Those diagnostic questions design us the prescriptive plan for those exact evaluations that are necessary. And so we can pinpoint those areas. But as we think about what it's costing us to bring in our school system folks and take them away from classroom and take them away from the services that they're providing to do the evaluations and the precautions that they're putting in place, I would say that almost negates itself, because again, now they're having to make up services that they weren't providing to students. And now we're having to pay them additional hours outside of their duty work hours to do so. And so there's always a counterbalance of, you give one thing to get another, and it's going to find a cost one way or another. But the ultimate is we have to make up students compensatory recovery services in the end when they haven't received what they needed, and there's going to be a cost somewhere.
Mr. Chair, if I may have one more question.
Yeah, just one more. No,
Thank you very much. Well, I can stand down if you want to, if we got other people.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So I see it says an independent. Who chooses? How's the person chosen, and how do we ensure that they are balanced in their approach?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Delegate Eberson. I know that that's something that you would work with the team with. The team usually has a list of the criteria they want that evaluator to be able to do, which is similar to what the evaluator in the district would do. So I guess conversation needs to be had about that. Do you have any other thoughts, Ashley or Delegate Griffith?
Delegate, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ashley.
I'm so sorry. School systems already have a list of providers that they give to families of people that they know can complete these evaluations and do so within the parameters that are required for a valid evaluation.
So it sounds like you're suggesting that they would approve of them. Thank you.
And Delegate, I just want to follow up on that. The letter of the law and the intent of the law. What's most important to me, and I'm not an education expert, I'm a parent who's been impacted by this. What's most important to me that we can find solutions for this. And I'm certainly open to any amendments and recommendations from you on how we can do this the most appropriate way.
Thank you, Delegate, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Delegate Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And Delegate Griffith, I appreciate this bill as well. We've spoken about it in the past, and I just wanted to make sure, because I haven't studied it recently, that I also understand and the committee understands all of the provisions surrounding getting an independent educational evaluation are already laid out in special education law. And I believe, and I want to make sure that all this bill does, it doesn't change any of that. And all this bill does is, correct me if I'm wrong, if the school system is not able to provide the educational assessment that's necessary to provide the IEP or to evaluate a child, that this bill will allow the parent to have the educational evaluation outside the school system, and the school system will pay for it. The only difference between this bill and the way that the law currently stands, because parents can already do this, correct? They can already go outside and have evaluations, and the school can in some cases pay for it, is that the school system would have to pay for it if it was because the school system wasn't doing it in a timely manner. Is that the main difference between current law? And
that's correct.
Okay, so I think it's a little simpler than
correct.
It sounds at face value. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I saw Miss Andy hop on. Did you want to say, Miss Culp? So you hop on. Did you want to
Yeah,
say?
I'm here. I'm sorry, I had technical difficulties.
Go ahead.
Great. No, I won't waste the committee's time since I was late. I'll just say ditto to everything and echo what Delegate Guyton was saying, that a couple years ago, we passed House Bill 611, which is Chapter 547, which gives parents the ability to get an independent evaluation, and they work with the school on that list. So it's a predetermined list. Right now, there's no legal remedy for a parent outside of litigation, expensive litigation, which is just going to cost the school system more to go get that evaluation. And the reality is that children have been, may have been in the middle of an evaluation when the pandemic hit, or the school said they would provide an evaluation, then the pandemic hit. So now they've been waiting 10 months to access their plan of education. And that's, it's pretty remarkable. It's happened outside of the pandemic. New York's had a problem for years. Maryland hasn't typically had this level of a problem, but there are hundreds upon hundreds of children in many of our districts who are still waiting for their evaluation so they can access their plan of education. So we're just trying to provide an option for the parents to try to get this in a more timely manner. And especially when we reopen, schools just aren't going to have the capacity to deal with the backlog in a timely manner, and certainly not going to be able to get this done within 60 days. So for those reasons, we urge the committee's favor.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, that concludes the public hearing for House Bill 716. Members of the committee, we will move to our second bill, House Bill 700. Delegate Ruth.
Let me unmute first. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth, presenting House Bill 700. HB 700 repeals a section of the Education Code that makes disturbing school activities a crime. I was shocked to learn that adolescents can be charged with a misdemeanor for acting up in school in a way that's typical adolescent behavior. The penalty, if convicted, is up to a $2,500 fine and up to 6 months in prison. Adolescent brains are still developing, and they haven't yet developed the impulse control of a fully formed adult. Anyone who's ever been the parent of a teen knows that defiance and anger are part of the territory. This doesn't mean we should accept such behavior. Part of adolescence is learning impulse control and appropriate behavior, but the criminal justice system is not the answer. Even if there's no conviction and no penalties, contact with the criminal justice system can be devastating for teens. A 2006 study found that first-time arrest during high school nearly doubles the odds of high school dropout, while a court appearance nearly quadruples the odds of dropout. Black and brown children are disproportionately charged under this law, and it contributes to the school-to-prison pipeline. According to 2020 data, 82% of children charged with disturbing school activities or personnel in Maryland were Black children or children of color. Because of implicit bias, people will often perceive behavior of Black children as more threatening compared with white children of the same age. And while there aren't specific data on children with disabilities with this particular charge, children with disabilities represent 23% of school arrests, but only 12% of the student population. One vivid memory brought home to me the seriousness of this law. One day when I was in middle school, I borrowed my brother's softball glove to take to school for phys ed. I promised him I would take care of it and bring it home so that he would have it on the weekend. On Friday afternoon, I was on the school bus when I realized I'd left the glove in my locker. I asked the bus driver if I could go back and get it, and she said that since the bus was about to leave, I couldn't. I panicked and started screaming and even cursing at the bus driver. I remember learning afterwards that the bus driver felt threatened, but I hadn't meant to threaten her, and I wouldn't have caused any harm. I was just panicking at the thought of letting my brother down. I know there were consequences, but I don't remember what they were. However, the consequences did not include criminal charges. And the truth is, even if the law had been enforced at that time, as a white child, I probably would not have been charged. And this law was never intended to be used in this way. Disturbing school laws were enacted across the country in the late 1960s as a response to Black student protests against segregation. They were never really intended to be used for internal school discipline. Now, I do have one amendment that I've submitted. The original text of this bill only repeals 26-101A, which prohibits disturbing school activities. However, after talking to the Office of the Public Defender, I've submitted an amendment repealing the entire section 26-101. The second part, which prohibits threatening school personnel, is often charged for minor or vague threats, like my school bus memory. Adolescents can make these kind of impulsive statements without meaning them. Genuine threats can still be charged under the criminal code, even if this is repealed. This only serves to criminalize adolescent behavior. The opponents will tell you that they need this law to protect school property and personnel. However, repealing this law will not in any way encourage lawlessness or prevent schools from enforcing discipline. Any behavior which does not rise to the level of criminality can be handled through internal school processes. And any behavior which is criminal can already stories from opponents of outside agitators entering school grounds or buildings and causing trouble. And if they but those outside agitators can already be charged with trespassing. And if they threaten, harass, intimidate, those can be charged under criminal law. If they destroy property, that can be charged as well. The school disturbing statute is duplicative and unnecessary and only serves to criminalize teens, primarily Black, brown, and disabled students. I will mention that this bill is supported by the Latino caucus. How many lives have been shattered under this law? Black Lives Matter is not just about police killings. It's essential that we change all the ways that our society and our law devalues and destroys Black lives. Let's repeal this unjust law before any more children's lives are destroyed. I ask for a favorable report on HB 700. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ruth. Questions, Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you very much, Delegate Ruth, for bringing this very informative bill to our attention. I have a question in terms of the statute. I admit I don't have it before me, but I do note that it says higher education. And that is, I understand the implication for public schools before higher education, but is the intent also to repeal for the higher education or the colleges and universities, community colleges, et cetera?
Well, I mean, I would say, we're most concerned on the impact on children, but,
Right.
even at 18, teenagers' brains are not fully formed, and they're still, developing that impulse control.
Okay.
And so even for college students, this is a concern. And as I said, anything that is criminal can still be charged under existing criminal statutes.
Absolutely. The question was, for me, was for clarity. I appreciate what you've done, and I look forward to the testimony that's coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Delegate Ruth, I really appreciate your advocacy on behalf of students. We saw a bill last week where students stood up for themselves beautifully. And I'm going to have a bill later this week where they're going to do it again about demonstrations. I do have a question. In looking at, it says a person you refer to protecting students, but a person could be any person. And so I concern myself that maybe we should tie that down. And maybe I've missed something in here, that we don't want to encourage or allow people from outside the building to do any one of those things that exists. I know they might be trespassing, but perhaps we should, your focus is on students, and I honor that. I want to make sure that I would like to work with you to make sure the bill does that too.
I'd be happy to talk to you to see, what we can do. I would also mention, I believe that there is a witness here from the Office of Public Defender who can address some of that question as well.
Good. Thank you.
But I am told that they have never seen. Well, I'll let them respond to it as well, because they can answer it better than I can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to any other questions for the sponsor of the bill. Seeing none, thank you very much. We're going to go to our first couple speakers. Miss Renuka Ridge. I say that right?
Hi. Oh, I'm sorry. It's Renuka Reggae.
Reggae. Okay, Renuka Reggae. Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm an attorney at the Public Justice Center. We advance racial equity in public education by combating the overuse of practices like suspension, expulsion, and school policing that disproportionately target Black and Brown children and push students out of school and into the criminal legal system. The PJC is a member of the Maryland Coalition to Reform School Discipline, which is committed to making school discipline practices fair, appropriate, equitable, and designed to keep youth in school and on track to graduate. The PJC and CRSD strongly support HB 700, which would repeal Maryland Education Code Section 26-101. Section 26-101 is overly broad because it criminalizes a wide range of behaviors, many of which are based on the subjective interpretations of school officials and school police officers. For instance, the statute criminalizes willful disturbance of schools. Any number of communications and behaviors, such as words, tone of voice, attitudes, refusals, or defiance, can be interpreted as willful disturbance. Thus, a child who is misunderstood or agitated is at risk of being criminalized. The same is true of a threat, which is also criminalized in Section 26-101. This is problematic because in the school context, a perceived threat may not be a threat at all. It can be an expression, word, or action that is consistent with normal adolescent behavior. It can also be that the school official or school police officer, clouded by biases attached to race, gender, or disability, perceives a student to present or express a threat that may actually be a moment of frustration or an inability to express a feeling. The subjective interpretations of childhood behaviors by school officials and school police officers drive and exacerbate the criminalization of Black children and children with disabilities in Maryland. In the 2018-19 school year, the number of arrests in Maryland schools for disruption was exceeded by only 3 other offenses. That year, over 57% of students arrested in Maryland schools for disruption were Black, and more Black girls were arrested for disruption than white males. Research has shown that the terms threat, harm, and disruption are subjective terms that are more often applied to the behavior of Black girls. Likewise, what is perceived as a threat when committed by a Black student is commonly not considered a threat when committed by a white student. Section 26-101 detracts from the urgency of implementing alternatives to criminalization for behaviors and needs that are best addressed by recognizing biases, understanding youth brain development, and providing supports to students such as counseling and behavioral health services that keep them in school and away from the criminal legal system. Therefore, repealing Section 26-101 is a necessary step to moving away from laws, policies, and practices that have criminalized children in Maryland schools and moving towards the resources, practices, and focus that support students, better address behaviors, and improve long-term outcomes. For these reasons, the PJC and CRSD strongly support HB 700. Thank you.
Thank you. McCall Gross. Did I say that right?
You did say it right. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Michal Gross, and I am an assistant public defender in Southern Maryland, where I represent children charged in both juvenile and adult court in Charles County. Children are sent to school to learn, and learning includes making mistakes and growing from those mistakes. As adults who have had the chance to learn from our mistakes, we need to repeal 26-101 of the Education Code and stop criminalizing kids for being kids. There's some specific problems that we have with the statute. First, the statute's duplicative, as was discussed. It's vague, as was discussed, and disparately applied to Black children and kids with disabilities. Kids act out. It's part of being a child, and that's actually covered in the school disciplinary process. So when you have a child who's charged under 26-101, they've already completed the school disciplinary process. In many occasions, they've already completed a suspension, and then they're forced to come to court. Kids have a fundamental sense of fairness, and this undoes their sense of fairness. It's like one parent punishing a child for missing their curfew by taking away their phone. The kid earns the phone back, and then the other parent comes and takes the phone away again for that same missed curfew from a week earlier. What this does is this leads to kids disengaging from school. School is no longer a safe place to them, and it's no longer a fair place to them. And you heard testimony from Delegate Ruth about the long-term repercussions of school-based arrests and what that does to a child when it comes to disengagement from school and their future. There's also some specific problems we have with the second part of the statute. The language is vague when discussing threats. Kids use words that adults don't understand. They talk about things like blowing up somebody's phone. They say things like, I could kill for that. And they don't mean that as a threat. That's just the language that they use. And if an adult responds to that language with zero tolerance, they won't ever build the positive relationships that help kids grow. They won't ever have the opportunity to discuss the child's intent or why they may have been frustrated. And so there's no lesson that's learned and no issues that are resolved. And even worse, you may notice the second part of the statute, subsections B and C, use the word molest. I can tell you every single time I have sat down with a child who was charged under 26-101 and saw the charge of molest, they shut down because kids are scared of that word. None of this is hypothetical. These are real problems across the state. There's a racial disparity in charging, and there are charges that are based on normal behavior within the school setting. Things like arguing with teachers, food fights, and pranks. I do want to tell you the story of a client that I represented. His name is DJ. He is a Black special education student who was in the 9th grade at the time. And he was charged for disturbing school operations for roaming the school halls instead of going into the office when told to do so. I watched the video as part of my preparation for this case, and I didn't see anyone disturbed. Everyone went about their business. According to the school police officer, the disturbance was that the art teacher closed the door to a classroom and the yearbook staff stepped aside when DJ walked past, followed by a police officer and an administrator. And it's not just a problem.
Ms. Gross, can you wrap up, please? Your time is up.
Absolutely, I am wrapping up. It wasn't just a problem that DJ was charged, it's that the officer pushed him into a locker, knocked him to the ground using a takedown move, and then paraded him through the school in handcuffs, all for not going to the office. DJS closed that case at intake because the behavior had been managed through the school disciplinary process. He'd been suspended, served the suspension, but the school police officer appealed, and DJ was forced to come to court. I implore this committee to put a stop to this and ensure that there are no more DJs and that there are no more children pushed out of school and funneled directly into the school to prison pipeline for acting like a kid. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We're going to take one more speaker, and then we're going to take questions from our members. Diana Bergman.
Diana Bergman, witness statement Favorable report for House Bill 700. Good afternoon, Chairperson Washington and delegates of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm here today to share my story. I have witnessed in the past as a former student, a parent, an educator, and an advocate. As a student, I was actually very impulsive, a busybody, and extremely talkative. Sometimes some adults would say I was willfully disturbing others and willfully preventing the orderly conduct of class instruction. As a mother, I see my son pacing back and forth in a room, bouncing on his tippy toes and attempting to sound out words which sound like noises. Again, sometimes some adults will say he's willfully disturbing others and willfully preventing the orderly conduct of class instruction. As an educator, supporting students with a language barrier, facing anxiety, frustration, and speaking in their native language. Once again, sometimes some adults will say ESOL students are willfully disturbing others and willfully preventing the orderly conduct of class instruction. As an advocate, I'm here to tell you, as a former student, I had rapid critical thinking skills, creative energy, and impressive communication skills to bring peers together to solve problems. I was a teenager willfully trying to cope with ADHD. I'm a mother who has a son who will pace to cope with sensory, bouncing when he's joyful, and will sound his letters to learn to communicate with others. He is a teenager, willfully trying to cope with autism. I share a gift of knowing multiple languages with teenagers, young adults who have amazing knowledge and experience and talents. ESOL students who are willfully coping with the language barrier. If I asked you to walk in my shoes as a former student, a mother, or an educator, how would you provide the burden of proof of what I willfully do as an individual? The deletion of a person may not willfully disturb or otherwise willfully prevent the orderly conduct of activities, administration, or class of any instruction of elementary, secondary, or higher education is the request. Not only because autocorrect is telling me that willfully is incorrectly misspelled twice. The legal language is unjust, discriminatory, and completely obsolete. We shouldn't be charging or punishing children for being children, especially when we can't provide a clear difference of what is willfully behavior of a child. Is the child being silly? Does the child have a disability or a language barrier? Or maybe the child is willfully being a child. Because I deeply care about children, I'm requesting a favorable report for House Bill 700. Education disruption of school activities, repeal of prohibition, and I'm willfully available to answer questions. I really do think this legislation needs to completely just go. We can't treat humankind this way. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And we look forward to you answering some questions for us. Delegate Holmberger.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And anyone can answer this question, or one of the attorneys too. So if the bill passes, and let's say that something bad does happen at school, someone gets hurt badly, there's theft, drug sales, drug possession, things that weren't mentioned in the testimony of the bill. What would happen with that student if it was something as egregious? Would law enforcement be brought in? I just want, if you could touch on if something like that happened, what would be the threshold to involve law enforcement?
Anyone wants to respond to that? Ms. Gross?
I'm happy to respond. Delegate, to answer your question, every single one of the behaviors that you described are covered under other parts of the criminal statute. So theft is a crime all on its own, and a child could be prosecuted for theft if it happened on school property. This bill does nothing to prevent that. Now, obviously, there's different kinds of theft situations, and I've seen children charged for stealing a bag of chips, and I'd like to think that the school would use its discretion whether or not they would even call the police for that. But if we're talking about egregious behavior on school property, there are other statutes that could address that, and there's no need for the disturbing school operations statute to cover that sort of behavior.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. We're going to go to our next speaker, Iman Freeman.
Thank you, everyone. To Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. My name is Iman Freeman, and I'm Director of Baltimore Action Legal Team. I'm submitting this testimony on behalf of the People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland. The People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland strongly supports House Bill 700, sponsored by Delegate Sheila Ruth, and we urge this committee to issue a favorable report. The People's Commission was created to reduce the disparate impact of the justice system on youth and adults who have been historically targeted and marginalized by local and state criminal and juvenile laws based on race, gender, disability, and socioeconomic status. Maryland's legal system contains many laws that unnecessarily bring young people and disproportionately youth of color to the attention of the justice system. Most often, this is for behaviors that are typical adolescent behaviors. HB 700 would repeal part of the Maryland Education Code that allows students to be charged with the misdemeanor crime if they willfully disturb or otherwise willfully prevent the orderly conduct of the activities, administration, or classes of any institution, elementary, secondary, or higher education, or threaten students. This law perpetuates the school to prison pipeline in Maryland, with 1,700 referrals to the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services for this reason in just fiscal year 2019 alone. This provision of the Maryland Education Code, one second, babe. This provision of the Maryland Education Code is so broad that youth can currently be charged with a crime for behaviors that should be handled within a school or school district, including making an impulsive comment in the heat of the moment or refusing to immediately follow directions from the school staff. Not only that, Maryland codes have said that students are not exempt from being charged with this crime because they have behavior problems, which means that the law can be used to criminalize youth with learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, and other types of disabilities. One second, babe. Finally, I don't know what you did. Finally, the term disturbing is vague and therefore highly discretionary and susceptible to disparate application to youth of color. One second, Jonathan. This part of the Maryland Education Code, I'm sorry, it's also
Just let him on the camera. Let him on the camera.
It's also close to nap time. This part, come here, baby. This part of the Maryland Education Code also runs directly counter to the goals of promoting academic achievement and success, as arresting young people of color and referring to them to court is associated with worse educational outcomes. Current state Board of Education regulations state that youth should not be referred to the juvenile justice systems for matters that should be handled through the school's disciplinary process. But it is clear that this is not adequate given the fact that the Department of Juvenile Services receives hundreds of referrals per year for this offense. This shows that the law has become a part of Maryland's school to prison pipeline. It should be removed from the Maryland Education Code altogether. For all the reasons that I've stated, the People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland strongly supports HB 700 and urges the committee to issue a favorable report. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that testimony. Tell Jonathan we said thank you for his testimony too.
I will, thank you.
He can come on camera if he wants to as well. We'll go to our next speaker, Miss Onisha McKenzie, who's soon to be a honorable member of this committee at some point.
Really, I am. You all are the cool kids, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you for having me. My name is Angasa Ichile McKenzie. I'm glad to be here again before Ways and Means to support House Bill 700. I'm here before you today as a parent of a student who is a teenager with an IEP and a 504 plan. I'm here as a former teacher as well who has taught students in crisis. I'm also here as a community advocate who's tired of the children in my area in Southern Maryland being pushed into the system of court dates, lawyers, charges, detention, and all those other scary things just for being a human child. So I was a teacher before I was a mom. I've taught mostly Black and Latinx students in Atlanta Public Schools, DC Public Schools, and right here in Silver Spring, Maryland. Over the years, I've had several students who came to school bearing trauma. And some of the things these children have endured, the people on this call could hardly bear. I've had students come to class sleepy from working all night, cranky and tired from taking care of their younger siblings. I've overlooked their outbursts in class because I knew that they were witnessing or experiencing domestic abuse. Maybe they're being bullied online or maybe in person. I've referred those students to counseling or social workers because I had that discretion. And unfortunately, because of this statute, other teachers and staff and school resource officers have that discretion to decide whether they're seeing a child in crisis or whether they're seeing a criminal who needs to be removed and charged. And that's the scary part about this statute that we're trying to have repealed. So we know that children in their minds, undeveloped minds, they seek attention in any way they can get because they haven't yet learned, in some cases, healthy ways to get the support that they need. They throw tantrums, they curse, they yell. Sometimes they need to wander. My own son, I had to advocate for him to have a yellow folder a few years ago. And he would take this yellow folder as an indication to the teacher that he needed to pace the hall for a minute, to take a break. Now, I know that he's thrown his backpack down on the floor before. And if all 30 of those kids look at that backpack that he just threw on the floor, is that a disturbance? Could my child have a misdemeanor under this statute? Yes, he could. And that's the scary thing. We know that this is disproportionately affecting Black and Brown students in my area to the tune of 88%. And that's because of that discretion factor and how it's being seen. Now, we're in a pandemic situation where our kids are suffering with really heavy mental stress, burden, disconnection, isolation. And as they come back to school, do we think they will need more support or less support? Do we think that they need more therapeutics or more punitive measures? We're already at 1,700 referrals for the year to students who are being charged under this statute. This statute must be repealed because it gives school staff license to criminalize literally any behavior that our children are doing that says, please just pay attention to me. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for letting me testify today.
No, thank you very much. And I want to see if anyone has any questions for these two speakers, including Jonathan. Okay, seeing none, our chairwoman is back, so she'll take over from here. Before we do that, a point of personal privilege, I would like to just acknowledge the chairwoman's birthday is today. She's 29 years old again, and just wanted to say happy birthday to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, everyone, for those wishes. Yes, 29 for the third or fourth time, something like that. But do tell me, I'm coming back from appropriations where I had a bill. What bill did we just finish up with?
700.
Yes, sorry. Yes, right. 700, and we're just with Ms. Misha.
I'm sorry, still in 700 or we're done with 700? Sorry.
We're still with 700. So next up is Meredith Weber.
Yeah, I'll let you finish this bill.
No problem. I got it.
Thank you for having me and happy birthday to the delegate. My name is Meredith Weber. I'm a licensed psychologist and certified school psychologist in Pennsylvania. I'm a nationally certified school psychologist as well. And I'm here to speak in favor of the bill. I also want to mention that my colleagues at the Maryland School Psychological Association also support this bill fully. There are many reasons, as some of the other speakers have said, why a child might disrupt a class on a given day. These range from learning difficulties, social emotional difficulties, communication issues, or just having a bad day. We know that punishment, absent of finding out the cause of the problem and teaching new skills, is ineffective. We also know that the human brain doesn't reach full maturity when it comes to decision-making or judgment, really until our mid-20s, thanks largely to the work of Lawrence Steinberg. The adolescent brain is not only equipped with this immature judgment and decision-making system, it also has a heightened pleasure center. So it's a really dangerous combo. It's been described as giving someone a sports car with a faulty braking system. The good news is that the teenage brain is also really malleable. It's really plastic. There's so much we can do to teach and support adolescents and help them with self-regulations and the other skills they'll need to be successful. As has also been mentioned, we know that trauma is much more pervasive than previously thought. It affects students in a number of ways, including academically, emotionally. It affects their physical and mental health, their ability to attend, their working memory. And so that is why a lot of districts in the country have shifted from zero tolerance policies and discipline to what's referred to as trauma-informed practices. What trauma-informed practices mean, it's a series of interventions that are evidence-based and which we know really help to support all students, not just the students that have been exposed to chronic stress and trauma. These are practices that focus on things like positive school climate and student-teacher relationships, which we really understand to be so important. Restorative practices is another really promising practice that's part of this, which not only cuts down on suspensions and misbehavior, but also on recidivism and reentry to the juvenile justice system. All this was true before COVID, and I think, as was mentioned, it's more important than ever right now. We know that all students in the country have experienced some degree of loss and trauma, and we know it wasn't equally distributed. Unfortunately, a lot of the students who have been hit the hardest by the pandemic and its consequences are also the ones most at risk for being targeted for disproportionate and inequitable school discipline. We also know, as has been mentioned, when discipline is subjective, when it's vague and uses vague terms, that's when we see some of the bias creep in. And a lot of this bias involves seeing Black and brown girls and boys as older and more adult than their white counterparts. And that's how they sometimes can end up getting shuffled to the juvenile justice system. So I really think this bill is an important step to ensure that all students are receiving the proper supports at the time they really will need it most. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. And thank you everybody who, oh, we have one more speaker, I'm sorry. Vince, who's unfavorable, Vince McAvoy.
Thank you so much, Delegate, appreciate it. I'm gonna change from the script of what I wrote down a little bit after hearing some of the comments, so forgive as I sort of ad hoc this, because it seems like the speaker, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. The sponsor seems to have written this bill and its amendments through the prism of her own cursing, and acting up in school, and I just don't feel that discipline issues should be grafted into this bill. And the other thing that I heard was that all these professionals, which, you know, through the veto, you're arguing to make huge payoffs to Kerwin and the teachers, are somehow wrong in their dealings with children. I find that remarkable, that we're giving them a huge pay increase, but we're not trusting them.
Hey, Mr. McAvoy, can you please
Yes.
come on camera for us, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm in a corner here. The best I can do is like an angle. I apologize.
Okay.
I've got two computer setups running. I do apologize. I'm in judiciary as well. So I'm hearing a lot about race, and I'm in city. I'm in Baltimore City. So I just find it almost laughable regarding the teacher demographics in the city. I think it's like 60%, could be wrong, are Black, and even more are non-white. So I'm saying that many offenses are not reported or they're ignored. And local teachers in Baltimore report, not suffer, but report one criminal assault per day. It was 341 and reported in 2019. We've seen videos where a person was teaching and they're beating teachers. They're beating our teachers. So I think we really have to think, if we're hitting teachers, are we not rising up to a criminal issue? I want to also remind, sadly, in Baltimore 2018, we had a murder in a downtown school between teenagers, 17 and I think they're both 17. And we also had a former student go into a school near Mondawmin, shooting up. I think he was in his 20s. And so students not acting up and not engaged in violence, how do you think that they feel about these disruptions? Do you think they want more or less disruptions? So this code is not being used in inappropriate ways. We're not calling the police for every backpack that's thrown on the ground, every person that curses. That's not happening. That's a fact. And last, I want to point out just how poorly the bill is written. As Delegate Ebersol pointed out, that this says in 1A, any person. So this would say that we could let any person onto our schools to disrupt and go scot-free. We don't want that. Children thrive in steady, routine learning environments. And if there are students who are acting up and increased female interrupted behaviors, I urge this committee to review the effects of fatherlessness on teenagers, the effect of not having the fit biological father in the home.
Mr. McAvoy, can you say your last sentence, please?
Wrapping up right now. As is the case for 75% of homes in Baltimore and PG County, it's harmful to our children and our children's learning experiences. As I have for years in Annapolis, I remain available to work with the committee.
Mr. McAvoy,
to fix this damage to
Mr. McAvoy,
fatherlessness.
do you
Thank
support or oppose the bill? We've already, the time limit, the vice chair had already given you the
Thank
wrap.
you. I do. I don't support it.
Thank you.
I'm favorable. I'm
All
sorry.
right,
I
I have
said that at the
questions
outset.
here. So Delegate Patterson, you have a question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. The question is for Ms. Gross. Thank you very much for the presentation you provided. In your delivery and in what you've uncovered or cited, are you ever given the opportunity to infuse or share this information with the school systems? I believe it's very pertinent what you have. Certainly, when we consider the repeal for the legislation cited in HB 700.
Thank you, Delegate Patterson. It's good to see you again. I just want to make sure I understand your question. Is it whether or not we've consulted with the school system about the
Absolutely,
repeal?
absolutely.
Okay. And no, I will say that I have personally not consulted with the school system, specifically in Charles County. I do know that, when this is available, when school resource officers are in the school, sometimes administrators will rely on policing instead of school disciplinary procedures. So I don't know what their position is on that, and I have not spoken to them directly.
As legislators, possibly your information we can infuse it into a delivery system for our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question for Mr. McAvoy, if he's still available. I know he's in 2 committee hearings right now, so he may be preoccupied. Perhaps as just a point of information, there are, 80% of the students in Baltimore City are Black, and only 40% of our teachers are Black. So that's the opposite of the information that was shared earlier. So I just want, for the benefit of the committee, to be aware that that data is not accurate. I have to go to another committee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Leaving us so soon. Geesh. No, I'm joking. Hey, Delegate Lasanti.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And I just wanted, I guess, a clarification, because the way I understand this bill, this bill says that disruptive acts are not then automatically, or doesn't, it takes out the option of making disruptive acts in the school system a criminalized act, right? Versus, I mean, that doesn't change the fact that if there's an unlawful act, there's still a criminal justice system to deal with that. What this bill is really doing is putting judgment into the school system and flexibility to be able to know the student, understand the act, and use judgment to find out whether the act is really disruptive and what really level of discipline is appropriate, not just an automatic check the block. Is that what I'm understanding?
Delegate Ruth, you want to answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you for the question, Delegate. I'm not sure exactly what your question means, but that basically the bill repeals that whole section. So it really takes away the discretion that sometimes children get charged in the juvenile system, based on discretion, where an administrator or a teacher, currently they use their judgment, and that judgment is sometimes clouded by their own biases. And so anything that's, if this bill were to pass and, this law were to be repealed, then anything that's genuinely criminal, as was said, could still be charged under criminal law. But it takes away that question, that vague discretion. Did that answer your question?
It does, and I think we're going at it. Actually, I think we're saying the same thing, just a little bit differently. The discretion that I meant is that sometimes people choose the discretion on the harder end of it. In other words, maybe take something out of context, right, and apply a harsher penalty than may be necessary. So by removing that, it's making it very clear that this is a disciplinary situation, but that is just in the school system. That really does not have any impact on an unlawful act.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Disruption is one thing, and that's disciplinary. Unlawful, which I think some people are trying to inject into this argument, this bill does not deal with unlawful acts. It's just disruptive acts.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, and thank you both. Seeing no other questions for the members, that concludes the public hearing for HB 700. I just want to make something clear before the chair takes over that, folks, for the general public, if you're speaking in front of the Ways and Means Committee, you must show your face. Otherwise, we will not recognize you. So you must show your face on the camera as you would when you come into our Ways and Means Committee in the House of Delegates here in Annapolis. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you for making that point in this very open and transparent process we have created here, as with members who turn off their cameras when they step away. We appreciate that from everyone. Our next bill is from, actually all the remaining bills are from members of our committee. Delegate Boatler, House Bill 665.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Joe Boatler, and I'm here today on House Bill 665. It deals with public charter schools, virtual learning programs. House Bill 665. This bill alters the definition of public charter school to include a virtual learning program. It requires a virtual learning program of a public charter school to employ a teacher with the same certification required by the professional staff of other public schools. I'm introducing this bill again because I believe it promotes school choice. It gives all kinds of learners. It offers families flexibility, and it provides an alternate option for schooling that is both accountable and rigorous for the students. The definition of a charter school under contract with a school board in which all or a portion of the instruction is provided through the means of the internet. And the pupils enrolled in and the instructional staff employed by the school are geographically remote from each other. Virtual charter schools are publicly funded, non-sectarian schools, and they are exempt from many regulations that may apply to traditional public schools. And they offer some of their classes are offered online. Now, because charter schools are publicly funded, but they're independently run, autonomy is given to the teachers and to the parents to craft an education for the students that accommodates and nourishes the individual's optimal potential. Online charter schools not only provide equal access for all levels of socioeconomic standings, but very importantly, allow students who have disabilities or parents in the military who travel for work to have this flexibility of continuity in education. K-12 and Connection Academies are examples of virtual schools that are used in over 29 states across the United States. Virtual charter schools have successfully implemented in Pennsylvania, Florida, Georgia, and Wisconsin. And there are many other states that have moved to adopt the virtual charter schools. This bill brings this opportunity to the Maryland charter schools. Online charter schools are a growing market in the school sector, and they mostly began in the early 2000s. Right now, Maryland has approximately 50 operating charter schools with about approximately 23,000 children attending these schools right now. Now, there's benefits to the virtual charter schools. One is flexibility. As these are cyber schools, they can encompass both live classes set at a specific time and a self-paced class. Online charter schools offer freedom of choice, and provide a maximum of flexibility for families. Unlike brick and mortar schools, online charter schools can break the barrier of poverty. This state-funded option would be open to all families regardless of the ability to pay, but with more flexibility than the traditional schools. And this is something that I really do believe that we need in some of our poorer areas in the state. Issues such as bullying and school shootings give parents a reason to keep their kids safe at home. This flexibility allows access to a quality education to students who need this individualized education, such as what you see top-tier athletes may get. Those struggling with mental health issues and military families who travel and move frequently, and many others find a private learning environment more productive than a classroom. It also allows students to focus on certain areas of learning, as some charter schools specialize in the arts and the sciences. Teachers still are a vital component for the students' growth and education. I will say that in Baltimore County, they actually, a number of years ago, they did a virtual school setup, and it was very, very successful. I had the opportunity to actually award a couple of those students because they were graduating from high school through the virtual learning. And I was absolutely amazed at how successful it was, and how many kids that really have a hard time to even be in a classroom were able to get a good education through that. Inclusive is another thing. You can opt into the educational program without any added cost. You get the education for free, just as you would attend a physical charter school. Virtual schools eliminate time spent on transportation to schools and the 6 hours spent at a school. Rather, it presents an efficient individual alternative to models of education. This also becomes important that where we have a lot of schools are very overcrowded. And I know that in some of the schools that are in my area, when I've talked to parents, would they opt into something like this, especially where the schools are overcrowded? And they said, absolutely yes. It's important that we recognize this is not for everybody. School choice is an important aspect of educational freedom, and adding a virtual component to public charter school gives another viable educational option that prepares students for college and careers. Many parents and educators are seeking alternatives to the traditional classroom-based education that can help improve academic achievement. Demand for these alternatives is evident in the growing number of choices available to parents and students. Online schools represent one approach to online learning that is gaining acceptance across the country. Pupils typically attend from their homes and communicate with teachers by email, telephone, and online discussion. Also, in a number of these schools that we actually have, they also are required that they would meet in person at the school, sometimes once a month, sometimes twice a month. It is important to know that some virtual schools, they operate under this blended learning model. Online schooling is not the easy way out. It requires initiative and self-discipline and the ability to work independent. Attendance at a virtual charter school is not homeschooling, and I think that's important for us to realize. This is not homeschooling. A virtual charter school is a public school authorized by a locally elected school board when a public school with a public school curriculum and certified teachers. Homeschooling is a home-based private education program that is created by the parent. Pupils in virtual charter schools must attend school regularly in whatever manner attendance is defined and monitor in a specific virtual charter school. Failure to do so can result in the pupil being dropped from the virtual charter school. Lastly, charter schools cultivate a student that has initiative and self-discipline and ability to work independently. Maryland will greatly benefit from adding a virtual component to the already existing charter schools in Maryland. HB 665 improves access, flexibility, and options while maintaining accountability and educational excellence in our great state. Thank you, and I urge that the committee would give this a favorable vote.
Thank you, Delegate Boatler. Any questions for Delegate Boatler? Thank you, Delegate. We next have one person signed up for oral testimony. We have John Willems.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, and want to begin by emphasizing that MABE has traditionally been at the table in strong support of the establishment of Maryland's highly accountable and local board governed public charter school program, and that we greatly appreciate that Delegate Boatler's bill is consistent with that in ensuring that local boards, if this bill were to pass, would continue to be the governing authority with regard to reviewing and approving the applications for these virtual charter schools. And so that's an important point to emphasize if with regard to charter school governance issues overall. There are many virtual and cyber charter schools around the country that operate under the direct authorization of, for instance, the State Board of Education, and they're authorized to operate in multiple jurisdictions. And that does not appear to be the intent of this bill, and we appreciate that. That said, we have historically and to this day been very concerned about the negative track record of cyber charter schools and operators of cyber charter schools in other states relative to that kind of lack of direct contact with in-person instruction and the assurances for accountability that local school systems are able to maintain with regard to more traditional charter schools, which may have a significant virtual component under Maryland's existing law. And that's the last point I want to emphasize. We don't feel that this law is necessary to provide boards with the flexibility to allow for a significant virtual component in either a traditional public school or a public charter school. And so for the reasons outlined in our written testimony, we do request an unfavorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willems. Are there any questions for Mr. Willems? All right, thank you both very much. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 665. We now have the Cecil County delegation represented by Delegate Kevin Bailey Hornberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the record, Delegate Kevin Hornberger, bringing you HB 692, Cecil County Board of Ed members' terms and compensation. This bill is also cross-filed SB 823 in the Senate. Some of the members that have been on for a number of years might recognize this bill. We actually passed it out of the House a few years ago. However, it languished in the Senate. We do have a cross-file this year. This bill seeks to do three things. One, it sets a term limit cap at 3 terms for our school board members. It raises their salary from $3,000 to $5,000 and $5,500 for the president. And then it also allows the county council to raise if they want to subsequently after the bill passes. And it cleans up language from references that were made to county commissioners, which we no longer have. The bill is unanimously supported not only by the delegation, but also the county council, the school board, and the county executive. And keep in mind that this rate has not changed since 2003. So with that, I'll take any questions and ask that the committee move favorable on this local bill. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Hornberger. Any questions for Delegate Hornberger? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the last 3 bills of the day, all with Delegate Guyton. If you can just keep them in numerical order. Start with 713.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday. I'm going to say it 3 times since I have 3 bills to curry favor. But today I will start my first bill by saying, first of all, I'm Delegate Michelle Guyton from District 42B, And I'm here to ask for your consideration of House Bill 713 to allow therapy dogs in Maryland public schools with guidelines to be developed by the county boards of education. This might sound familiar to you. I did present this bill last year as well, near the end of the session, and I had like a cute little puppy named Cozy Girl on my lap. I really wish she were here with me today because I believe in this bill and I believe in the healing power of dogs. I'm also a victim of a puppy pandemic this year and have my own new puppy at home. So that allows you to know what my biases are as I go into this. But I do want to let you know that currently there's no consistent policy that either prohibits or allows therapy dogs in Maryland schools. And this lack of guidance is confusing, and HB 713 clarifies this problem. Therapy dogs are not service dog animals, so it's not the ones that people will take onto airplanes or into buildings, or emotional support animals. We are talking about something very different. We're talking about animals that are trained as to do animal assisted therapy and as facility dogs. And those are defined actually by the International Association of Human Animal Interaction as goal-oriented and structured intervention that intentionally includes or incorporates animals in health, education, and human service. And it's for the express purpose of therapeutic gains in humans. So animal assisted therapy may sound like a feel-good solution, but actually there is very, very solid science behind the significant benefits of allowing therapy dogs in school settings. And I would ask you to consider those carefully. Studies have demonstrated, lots of studies have demonstrated that interacting with a therapy dog once a week is successful in reducing depression and anxiety and alleviating the effects of social rejection. And there have been also studies that have shown that interaction with a canine has demonstrable effects on physiological correlates of stress. So blood pressure and cortisol levels. And we've known for a long time that academically, students who interact with therapy dogs show increased school attendance. They want to be there. They demonstrate behavioral changes and decreases in office referrals. So this is a behavioral aid, and they have gains in confidence and motivation. But more significantly, actually for our committee sometimes, is the fact that they also have demonstrable, measurable increases in reading and writing levels, between 15 and 30% improvement, which if we had a particular curriculum or pill that would give that to some of these kids, we'd probably consider it. So my own sons learned to read with the Karma Dogs literacy program at our local library in Towson. So I have been a fan for many, many, many years of this program. So there are over 4,000 schools using the most common pre-K-12 volunteer curriculum program in US schools. And therapy dogs are in every state and in many countries and in many schools in Maryland, but they're not in all of them. New York City Public Schools began a comfort dog pilot program. They started with 7 schools to improve school climate and culture and to teach social emotional learning. All the students have access to the program, but it is particularly aimed at students who require counseling service and students with special education needs. So students with autism in particularly responded well to these interventions. And the program is an integral part of the school system's crisis intervention protocols in New York City Public Schools. And it's used to de-escalate successfully behavioral violence situations. So the school system also describes the dogs as part of the counseling team. So after 1 year, the program grew from 7 pilot schools to 40 schools, and is considered an incredibly impactful and cost-effective intervention. And of course, they are very adorable as well. So I do want to tell you a few differences between this bill and the bill that you heard last year. In the interim, I've tried to address concerns shared by county boards by providing more guidance in this bill regarding certification, insurance, and notification to families in particular. And I think it's important to note that as students return to school soon after this closure, we all know that we're going to be faced with incredible behavioral and adjustment issues and challenges with learning loss that will certainly be significant, although we don't even know the extent of them at this point. it just makes good sense to allow therapy dogs into schools to provide a low or no cost, because generally they're provided by volunteer organizations, and you will hear from them, and proven effective remedy to so many of these problems. So now is the time to use all methods that we have available to us to support our students and our teachers. So I was asked by our subcommittee chair, Washington, and vice chair to provide a video for you demonstrating the work of the dog. So I did have that available, only to find out that I couldn't show a video today. So we are emailing that to all of you. It's worth your time to watch because it is really a great explanation of what these dogs do and how they interact with children. So, and I would also bring your attention to my testimony. There's a lot of information and written testimony from different schools, particularly New York schools and schools from all over the country that are doing this program and believe that Maryland should be a part of it as well. So with all of that, I asked for a favorable report for House Bill 713. I do have one amendment, and that is just to add the word "and facility" to therapy dogs. So we're looking at therapy dogs and facility dogs, and that is purely to align the language in this bill with language that's already in Maryland statute and courts and the criminal code. So with that, I will turn it over to questions and to other folks to testify about their puppies.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. Delegate Ebersole, if you have a question, you must.
I'm sorry, I'm not on camera. I didn't realize.
There you go.
Yep, thank you. So I see that, and that's a good idea, I think, that you require each therapy dog to be accompanied by a handler. Largely silent, and I didn't see anything in the fiscal note either about who would supply that and who would bear the cost of supplying that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Delegate Ebersole. Actually, these are volunteer organizations, and you're going to hear from several of the largest in the country in just a few minutes. And so there really is no cost to the school system for this program. These are volunteer organizations that come in. The dogs have their own handlers, so you never just like allow the dogs in the school to run around. That's not what we do. So let me clarify that for everyone. You have a trained dog that is certified, insured, has gone through a program, and its trained handler who trains it and takes care of it and is with it at all times. So again, volunteer programs, so no cost for that for the school system. And as far as the training and insurance and all of that is concerned, there is some of that in the bill that we're allowing the local boards to make guidelines on, but a lot of it is actually already in the law, purely because we added that amendment that said facility dog to this bill.
And not to cast any shade on the handlers, because I'm sure they're people, but would the school system then need to vet them for direct contact? Because they'll be not only in direct contact with their student, they'll be with other students as well. So who would perform that vetting, or what information do we have on that?
Sure. Actually, that is a really good question. So I would love to make sure that that's covered in this bill. I'll refer that to some of the folks who are coming after me, because they know how this is working in other places and they're actually doing it in the school systems. My understanding is that no one who wasn't already vetted by the school would ever be alone with a child and the dog, right? There would be other people there, but certainly, I would hope to work with you and the subcommittee to make sure that that's definitely part of the bill, and that they're vetted and that they have the background checks necessary. But I would like, I've got many people talking about this, so I'm going to let them go, but I would like, if any of you can, to address that, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving.
Certainly. Delegate Branch?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask a question in regards to the dogs. I know that there are no hypoallergenic dogs, but I do know that some of the breeds are more, a lot better for people who suffer from allergies. So I'm just wondering, are those the breeds that you're going to be looking, that you will have in the bill? Because especially, I have children who suffer from allergies really bad, especially with dogs. So that's my question to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's certainly not the first time that question's come up in the past 2 years since I've been working on this bill. And that is one of the guidelines that we've asked the county boards to address to determine how they want to deal with that issue. But we will also have our testimony talk about how other groups and other states are dealing with that and other schools are dealing with that. Certainly the dogs that I have met, and I don't know that this applies to all of them, so I'm not going to say that for sure, but Cozy Girl, whom I know the best, is hypoallergenic. We're also making sure in this bill that these dogs, again, aren't going to be running willy-nilly around the classrooms, right? The way that they're being used right now, at least in Maryland, in the example you're going to hear, is that the kids are actually brought to them in the counselor's office or in a confined space. So it's not like every child is exposed if they don't want to be or they're allergic. Although I would agree that we want to try to make it available to every child. So hyperallergenic dogs would certainly be preferable, but I'll let them speak to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Branch. Great question. Seeing no other questions, we'll start with the witnesses. We'll take the first three and then have some questions and then the next three. Catherine Flory.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Katie Flory, and I am the Community Relations Director with the Maryland SPCA. We are absolutely in favor of this bill, and I did submit written testimony as well, so I would actually like to address Delegate Ebersol's question. Not only do I run a program in Baltimore City Schools, I am also a certified handler with a dog, so I have actually been through this process. And before I could go into any school, I did have to go through quite a bit of training with my dog, as well as I was background checked, fingerprinted before I was able to go into any school. So yes, it absolutely is a policy and procedure that we follow not only individually as a handler, but also as the organization with the Maryland SPCA. Our program is slightly different. We run what we call Wagging Tails Academy, where we bring in therapy teams, includes an animal and a handler, and we work with children on literacy skills as well as kindness to animals. And when I first started this program, I developed it, I started it, I piloted it. My goal was, I'm going to teach kids to read. And it really has helped with that. But I'll tell you, the absolute biggest difference that I've seen in this program is how children respond to each other, how children are responding to adults. And we're seeing a bigger, huge, and much bigger, I guess, positive consequence in using our dogs. One of the other things I wanted to mention is I've been listening to the session today, and a number of the bills have focused on trauma and they focused on children with disabilities. And I can't tell you how important it is to have therapy dogs in your toolbox. This is another tool that we can use to help young people as well as adults, as teachers, in going through their day-to-day life. Unfortunately, so many people in our community have been faced with trauma, all sorts of different trauma. And the other kind of side effect that I've seen through using therapy dogs is they really help these young people by providing no judgment, providing a little bit of a scratch here and there. I also wanted to address Delegate Branch's question about allergies. I do have some dogs in our program that are hyperallergenic, and I have some that are not. We never force any child or adult to interact with a dog that they may be allergic to. We actually use stuffed animals, which I've also found, can provide a positive interaction between the children if they would like to. What I more so face is not allergies, but are young people that are scared of animals. And we've had a number of children who haven't interacted with the dog until the end of the semester when all of a sudden they're ready to. So we're seeing a million positive interactions with people and dogs and positive things that are happening in our community by the use of therapy dogs and their teams. Lastly, I just want to say that the organization, the Maryland SPCA, I know a number of the other organizations on here today, we are all willing to work with our school systems to help them find the best policy for them. And it would really help all of us to streamline the process. Some schools I walked into are like, yes, come on in with your dog. Others are like, I don't think we're allowed to have the dog. They don't know what the actual policy is.
Ms. Flory, your time is.
Yep. So that would help us. So I ask for a favorable vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We next have Gina Casimir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And delegates, thank you so much for inviting us. And thank you, Delegate Guyton, for putting this bill forward again. I am the Executive Director of Pets on Wheels. We are one of the largest therapy pet organizations in the state of Maryland, and we are currently working with 57 schools across the state. All of our therapy pets are vetted and certified, and I have submitted written testimony that has some of that information. But I want to address some of the important points that have been brought up by Delegate Ebersol and Delegate Branch. One of the things that we do for our teams is that we evaluate the team. Obviously, the pet's temperament is most important, but we want to make sure that the handlers have skills also. Although the handlers don't really interact very much with our students in a typical situation, they need to be in control of their pets and they need to make sure that they are appropriate. We background check all of our people before they're allowed into our program. We run them through case history. We run them through the sexual offenders list. So before you can even join Pets on Wheels or even be evaluated, you're background checked. Every 2 years, we evaluate our animals, and that's because things can change, and a pet that's wonderful on year 1 might not be wonderful on year 2. For Delegate Branch, I would like to reiterate there are no true hypoallergenic animals. However, one of our requirements is that the animal be bathed and that nails be trimmed before they make visits. This is to make sure that we try to prevent any extra allergen opportunities. And again, no one is ever forced to interact with them. What we love about this bill is that it answers the question that we've gotten from many schools, which is, can we do this? Within the same county, we have schools that are inviting 3 and 4 volunteer teams in every other week. And we have schools where a teacher or a counselor or a librarian has wanted to have a program and only been to be told by their supervisor, we're not sure that we can do that, so we don't want to take that opportunity. This will help overcome that and make sure that every school that wants to have a therapy pet program can institute one. Now, we've done programs that focus on reading. Delegate Lasanti may know our program that we do in Bel Air. We work with the special needs students at Bel Air High School through their art class. That has been incredibly successful in encouraging creativity. In Southern Maryland, we work with some schools on retention. Our dogs are used as part of a curriculum development program that keeps kids in schools. And we're working with Katie Flory over at the MDSPCA to be certifying more therapy teams to be part of the Wagging Tails program. But there's an even greater need, and we know that there's more interest than we can meet. Because our pets are certified, that means that they are required to have annual health examinations. We do fecal examinations. We have a very extensive zoonotic disease protocol that all of our volunteers are required to read. This is a volunteer job, but it's a job and it's for real. And we're very, very serious about that. You're welcome to go to petsonwheels.org and look at our volunteer handbook and look at some of our protocols. You can see the volunteer application there, and that's just step 1. You can also see some videos there of how our pets interact with people that might help answer some of the questions and show you.
Your time is up as well.
Thank you, and I hope that this will get a favorable report.
Thank you. Kathy Klotz. Is Kathy here? Oh, there she is. You have to unmute.
Unmute myself. There you go. Hello from Salt Lake City. I'm Kathy Klotz. I'm the Executive Director of Intermountain Therapy Animals. We were founded in 1993, and we've been providing animal-assisted interactions in a wide variety of settings for more than 27 years. We also have 21 colleague organizations throughout the US who use our training and testing standards. One of those groups is New York Therapy Animals, and you're going to be hearing from Nancy, their executive director, today as well. I want to endorse what Katie and Gina have been saying about how seriously we take this, that it's more like a paraprofession than a typical volunteer job. And the first priority of teachers, parents, and all school personnel is, of course, the safety and well-being of their students. And we share those concerns equally, and it's why it's so important that therapy animal teams be rigorously trained and tested and licensed and insured for liability, and why the Maryland bills are including important criteria for that screening. When all the precautions are in place, therapy animals can be incomparable catalysts and motivators. They very often advance therapeutic and educational goals in ways that people cannot. We've been asked to talk about our program, Reading Education Assistance Dogs, or the READ program, which we launched in 1999. It was the original model for children reading with therapy animals, but importantly, those benefits are so much more holistic. It's not just about reading skills. We've qualified more than 6,500 READ teams throughout the US and 26 other countries to do this. It's a serious literacy support intervention based on solid educational models. It's not just a diversion or a gimmick on the side. So READ teams help children not only improve their basic reading skills like fluency and comprehension, but they also inspire them to fall in love with reading and books and to send their confidence soaring. We started by focusing on children aged 4 to 8 because that's when it's so important that they learn to read so they can read to learn for the rest of their lives. But since then, we've worked with all ages and abilities, and including students who are learning English. We have endless testimonials and awards for the program, but really most important to us is the impact the program has on every single child, one by one. And as a team with my own Australian Shepherd for 8 years and an executive director since 1997, I've been seeing these benefits in thousands of encounters myself. People often tend to call them magical, but there is scientific evidence underpinning everything that happens in these encounters. Therapy dogs can be a powerful adjunct for your teachers and counselors, and they'll enhance the whole spectrum of academic, social, and emotional development. Yeah. Thank you. So, anyway, the whole atmosphere. So thank you. We urge you to support this bill. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We'll, on these first three, we'll have questions. Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question regarding liability and/or disclaimer, and thank you very much, Delegate Guyton, for bringing this bill forward. So the question is either for Gina or Katie regarding with school systems. Is there a disclaimer or liability waiver?
I can answer for our organization. First of all, yes, every child that participates in our program, their parents must sign a waiver to be a part of the program. Also, when I became a certified handler, and we do work with Gina quite a bit, I also work with an organization called Pet Partners. Part of my certification comes with liability insurance, although it's not something we're ever going to have to use because our animals are so well trained that we won't have to, but it does come with that. And then yes, everyone has to fill out a liability waiver before they participate in our specific program. And Gina, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
Absolutely. We have liability waivers that we sign with our facility partners, which in our case are the schools themselves. Individual schools may ask for a liability waiver from parents. Some do not. That is, again, part of the patchwork that we have currently happening. Each one of our volunteers signs a code of ethics. They also sign a liability waiver for our organization. We carry liability insurance on our organization, on our volunteers, and we also carry accident insurance for our volunteers. So if they trip and fall at a school, they are covered under our accident policy. So we have an extensive insurance program, and that is partly why we retest everybody every 2 years to make sure they're still up to snuff.
Thank you all. We have a question, Delegate Lasanti.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Casimir, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for your testimony. I just had a quick question for the sponsor. I was wondering if you would accept a friendly amendment allowing the Ways and Means Committee to be a pilot program for you.
Can I second that?
Just saying, we could try it out and see if it worked in the legislature. Just thinking.
Thank you, Delegate Lasanti. Before you joined our committee last year, I did bring the dogs into the committee.
I remember.
And I felt like it really raised the morale of the group. So yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Right now, my dog is sleeping 10 feet away from me. So she's.
My cat is actually upset because she just wants to know why she can't be a part of this.
Yeah, I know. My dog and cat are both mocking me right now from the bed.
Thank
you. Next witness we have is Nancy Michaelson. In, oh, there you are. You have to unmute.
Hi, greetings from New York City. My name is Nancy George Michaelson. I'm Executive Director of New York Therapy Animals, a 501c3 nonprofit and an affiliate of Intermountain Therapy Animals. We are the official Reading Education Assistance Dogs Children's Literacy Support Program. We've partnered with 62 New York City schools for volunteer therapy dog team visits with students ranging from pre-K to high school seniors, partnering with the New York City Department of Education, private and charter schools. New York Therapy Animals educates both ends of the leash, the human partner and their dog, in required workshops, therapy dog training classes, and in continuing education courses. We promote healthy relationships through humane education. Our criteria for dogs are well-mannered, social, and predictable, and inspire confidence in their interactions with people. And above all, the dog must enjoy this job. The dog may never have shown aggression towards people or other animals. The dog must be thoroughly examined by a veterinarian for health, safety, and appropriate temperament. The human partner is a proactive supporter for their dog, demonstrating a solid, loving relationship. They're a team. They're well prepared, thoughtful, and compassionate, working closely together to help support students in school environments. Once completing the training and passing their evaluation, the skilled team begins volunteering and engaging in specific student needs requested from social workers, psychologists, teachers, guidance counselors, speech and occupational therapists, literacy specialists, and for exposure-based interventions. These school interactions can be a facilitator to social connection and conversation, helping the student to open up and feel more at ease. It's a time for the student to experience touch, to give and receive affection with a calm and gentle therapy dog, respectful of boundaries. It can be a safe learning exercise to divert attention away from internal anxieties and to enjoy the experience with the goal of improving self-confidence, self-awareness, building courage, and encouraging shared thoughts and questions. Dogs do not judge, laugh, or criticize. Special needs students can benefit from these interactions, enhancing social and emotional skills. Meet and greet wellness visits are arranged for students during stressful and demanding exam times. There are sound and scientific benefits of interacting with a dog. Blood pressure, heart rate, fear, and anxiety levels decrease. Breathing slows. There's an overall significant feeling of relaxation and the release of oxytocin, the natural miracle feel-good drug for bonding, all the while increasing trust and motivation. And it's fun. A therapy dog team walks into the room and it changes the entire atmosphere. Faces light up with big smiles. I just have a quote from one of the students. I think the program is helpful because you can practice reading, and if you mess up a word, you don't get embarrassed. It's so exciting to have Willie visit my school. I calm down so that I can use my energy with Willie. I say hi to Willie and he's soft. He makes me feel good and I like to brush him. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mary Callahan?
Thank you, Chair Kaiser, and happy birthday. And thanks to all the members of the Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 713. As the Chief Mission Officer for Pet Partners, I'm pleased to be able to support HB 713 and the benefits of therapy dogs in schools. Established in 1977, Pet Partners is a leader in demonstrating and promoting the health and wellness benefits for therapy animals. With more than 10,000 registered teams nationally making more than 3 million visits annually, Pet Partners is a respected nonprofit organization registering volunteer therapy animal teams to the most rigorous standards in the industry. Our therapy animal teams visit in a variety of settings and many different populations, including patients in recovery, people with intellectual disabilities, seniors living with Alzheimer's, veterans with PTSD, those approaching end of life, and of course, students in schools. All of these with the goal of improving human health and well-being through the human-animal bond. While many of us intuitively understand the benefits of positive interactions with animals in our lives, the body of empirical evidence supporting work with therapy animals has become increasingly robust over the last few years. Research has shown that therapy animals may help with a variety of aspects in learning environments. Among these include fostering reading abilities such as reading rate, accuracy, fluency, and comprehension, enhancing primary skills such as object recognition and categorization, reducing stress levels, especially surrounding events like final exams, and providing a source of motivation, stimulation, and focus in learning. Bringing animals into schools, of course, should be done thoughtfully, intentionally, and with steps to mitigate risk. Fortunately, publications such as the Standards of Practice for Animal-Assisted Interventions, which articulates guidelines for therapy animals and their handlers, can be an excellent resource for school boards adopting policies to ensure both safe and effective interactions. In summary, research does support that there are benefits of therapy animals for students, and resources do exist to support sound policies for schools and school boards. Pet Partners is excited to see the state of Maryland leading the nation in proactive legislation around therapy animals, and we're happy to support HB 713. I'm available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. The next person testifying is Harriet Kuhn. And while I appreciate everyone earlier wishing me a happy 29th birthday, I guess I shouldn't mention that Harriet was my camp counselor over 30 years ago.
Good afternoon, Chairman Kaiser, Vice Chairman, members of the committee. It's really nice to see you again. Cozy's here, and Delegate Guyton, I'm so sorry that we can't be there together in person because I know she enjoyed being with you, meeting the members of the committee last year. And I just want to say that I have been a school psychologist for over 30 years. I work in Montgomery County Schools. I'm not representing any school district, but I came before this committee, as you know, last year to testify about my passion for helping children and the use of therapy dogs in schools. Over the years, I've had success in using a therapy dog with children. Therapy dogs really create magic in schools and are needed now more than ever. It's hard to find any program that matches having a kind and compassionate, trained dog in a school being there to assist children. That is why House Bill 713 must be passed. Please allow me to elaborate and tell you why this bill is so important to students, staff, and the families of Maryland schools, especially now. We have a wide range of students who attend Maryland schools, from Head Start to high school, special education to general education students. And as you all know, we are currently experiencing a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic where children have been out of school buildings for a year and have been engaged in virtual learning. Once it is safe to return, children will need a wide range of mental health services. And I want to convey to the committee, much like everybody else today has, that therapy dogs really do provide this emotional and social support for students. You've heard about the data-driven research that shows that these specially trained dogs improve well-being and mental health. Children exposed to dogs are naturally able to learn about kindness. They're able to learn about kindness, empathy, and self-control. When there's a friendly dog in a school environment, staff and students thrive. We will need as many student supports that are available to assist in meeting the needs of all students when we can safely go back into school buildings. Therapy dog programs rely on volunteers, so this is a no-cost way to provide mental health services to children in school. And as I stated last year before this committee, when therapy dogs are allowed in school, students benefit. They make improvements in the area of social emotional functioning, gross motor skills, as well as reading and language skills. You've heard about that today. You've heard about the research. And my firsthand knowledge tells us that these dogs build confidence, allow kids to grow and develop in order to reach their maximum potential. Dogs in school provide comfort and an unparalleled sense of normalcy for students, which is a great area of need. So as you know, Cozy Girl here loves everyone. She's my therapy dog. She's worked in several schools with me. She's been tested, is registered. She's an American Kennel Club dog, an Alliance of Therapy Dog, and a Canine Good Citizen. She always works to assist dogs as students as needed. Students who have had suicidal thoughts, anger, depression, or anxiety have found that a visit with Cozy Girl has helped them calm down, refocus, and go back to class, which is preferable to having an administrator phone a parent. All Maryland students should have access to working with a therapy dog in their school if it will benefit them. Thank you so much for your support of this bill.
Thank you. Any questions for these last three witnesses? Thank you all very much. Seeing none, we'll move lastly on to John Woolhams in opposition. Mr. Woolhams, do you hate dogs?
I do not. I love animals and they love me.
I'm just kidding, of course.
And I'm a little more allergic to cats than dogs, and therefore cats love me more than dogs. So your cat will find me in my lap immediately, and I will be sneezing. But that's about it. In terms of the bill, what I've heard, of course, I mean, very compelling in terms of the benefits to students, and we do anticipate the need to rethink and reimagine some of our approaches to social emotional learning when we return in person. And would say always appreciate Delegate Guyton's thoughtful approach to these education-related bills. Her experience on the State Board of Education and track record in the Ways and Means Committee is a testament to that. What I've heard is a desire to create what I think in the law is called express authorization for school systems to allow therapy dogs, as opposed to this unanswered question as to whether it is permitted under the law or not. And for that reason, would suggest the old authorization versus requirement trick, if you will, of changing a couple shalls to mays, rather than requiring that each county board allow the use of therapy dogs, to say each county board may allow the use of therapy dogs, and that boards may adopt policies then in accordance with their decision to allow therapy dogs in schools. And that relates not only to the state or the county-wide decision-making and governance role of local boards, but also the misperception, if you will, by a principal or teacher that the law says that they're allowed, that it says they shall be allowed, and therefore I at the local level as a principal or teacher can permit this, and recognizing that would ideally, you know, occur within whatever the county policy is, but it seems to be kind of overreaching in a way to say that this is a statewide mandate, that each county must adopt a policy to allow it and move forward from there. And so, look, the benefits of these trained therapy dogs, I think, are evident. And it sounds like, and certainly from doing some online research in Maryland and around the country, they're doing great things in schools already. And so you have our written testimony in opposition to the bill, but I've identified a couple amendments there to make it more authorizing than mandating, that may make it a bill that we could live with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woolhams. Delegate Hornberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Williams, this might be a question for council, but it's my impression that the ADA doesn't have any carve-outs for school systems. So, you know, whether we pass this bill or not, could someone clarify for me on a school's ability to prevent someone having a dog like this? Because I'm not aware of any exemptions for school systems or for people that are under the age of 18.
Well, Delegate Hornberger, I think that the distinction that would be helpful is the difference between service animal, which are defined and regulated under federal law, actually under Maryland law and the federal law under the ADA, and you know, which is why even if you're living in a pet-free you know, apartment, you can have your service animal, notwithstanding that prohibition, and that doesn't apply to emotional support or therapy animals. There are a lot more restrictions and governing rules, as I understand them, through the national accreditation and associations with regard to therapy animals than there are for emotional support animals. That's worth noting. And I see a lot of nods from the experts. That's good. But in terms of the ADA and the federal restrictions, that only applies to the trained service animal.
Okay. So currently, if I'm, for example, vision impaired and I have a qualified service animal, I can currently bring it into school.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Hornberger. I'm sure others had a similar question. Any other questions for Mr. Willems? All right.
I wonder if I can shall I speak for a second about the portending mental health crisis?
Unfortunately, we have to only allow 3 minutes to every already had that. So sorry that you can't, but Delegate Guyton can ensure that you get that chance to communicate that with others after today. We're now moving on to the hearing on House Bill 715. We are taking these last two out of order upon Delegate Guyton's request. 715, please begin, Delegate Guyton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday again. Thank you for your consideration of House Bill 715, which requires the installation of cameras in self-contained special education classrooms in Maryland public schools. You will remember this bill from last year as well. Self-contained special education classrooms are those which include students who are not fully integrated into the mainstream school community, who are certificate track, and who are qualified for alternative high school assessment. So these are our most vulnerable and the kids who have the most profound disabilities in our school system. The thing to note for this bill in particular is that they are also often nonverbal, or they have very significant communication challenges, and hence the need for this bill. House Bill 715 actually has a dual purpose. The bill is being introduced to ensure the safety of the most vulnerable students and to protect teachers as well from allegations of abuse that are difficult to prove or to disprove without some sort of evidence when your students are nonverbal. Parents of special education students in public schools and advocates have overwhelmingly supported the legislation, and so have many teachers. We have worked with teacher groups, MSEA, to make sure that their concerns about access to the video has been addressed, and to guarantee that the video will not be monitored without cause and will not be used for teacher evaluation. In addition, non-affected students, so those who are not part of a complaint, will be redacted from any video viewed in order to protect their identity. And I know that this was a concern of Delegate Ebersol in particular. So due to restrictions in current Maryland law, no audio will be available, and video will only be available to law enforcement and to persons who are directly involved in a reported incident to protect confidentiality of everyone involved. And I do recognize that we have an amendment in one of the written testimonies asking for audio. My understanding is that is not something that I can add through this bill, but we can continue talking about that. For all of these reasons, I respectfully ask for a favorable report on House Bill 715. There is one amendment to this bill, and that actually mimics last year's bill. It was just left out in drafting, and it says that these are going to be available upon request. So they won't automatically be put into these classrooms, but they will be added upon request of a parent or a teacher or administrator. So thank you very much. And I would once again ask you to please look at my written testimony. We do have quite a few people who are involved in all three of the bills today and have taken time to give you some very insightful opinions. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. And to members, we'll take like 4 people at a time. There's quite a few people signed up, but I apologize. Questions first for just Delegate Guyton. Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I appreciate that you've dealt with some logistical issues from last year and that you addressed them. I do have in the definition on the first page, it defines a special education classroom. In particular, it's a classroom in which a majority of the students who are classified primarily as special ed that would qualify. From personal experience, I taught Algebra 1 classes that had more than half of the students learning using IEPs and that were in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So there would be, I'm concerned there would be a little bit of a shift, like that class might not, if I lose 2 students, it might not qualify, but if a student comes in, it might. So I'm concerned about the sort of fluid nature of that definition in classes that would qualify.
Thank you, Delegate Ebersol. And I'm sorry, I have too many bills today, so there are too many pieces of paper in front of me.
That's right. It's on page. It's on your second page toward the bottom in definitions.
Because that is not So I believe the critical word here is self-contained. Right? So these are self-contained special education classrooms. These are not those that are mainstreamed into the regular schools. So if you have students that are coming in and out of your math classes, but going to other classes, then that would not, this is my understanding. So we would want to have council look at that again, but through
Yeah.
recommendations, it really should be, and we're only talking about one class, maybe not even one class in every school, but generally one class per school that would be self-contained special education, certificated students with alternative assessments.
I don't see it in the definition, so we probably need to tie that.
Oh, okay. It should be, but I'll find it for you.
But, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll start with some of the witnesses. Starting with Rich Gibson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Gibson, 6th Attorney for Howard County. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here today to offer my support for House Bill 715. Unfortunately, there's evil in this world, and wrongdoers often seek to prey upon those that lack the ability to effectively advocate on their own behalf. Special needs students, some of whom are nonverbal or have difficulty communicating due to mental, physical, or emotional disabilities, are sadly all too often taken advantage of by others in their learning environment, a place where they should be free and feel safe to learn, play, and grow. In Howard County, we had a case where a bus driver's assistant was captured on video slapping a nonverbal child for squirming in their seat. The parents suspected abuse because of a change in the child's temperament and some injuries they observed. If not for the video, that case would have been unprosecutable, would not have been able to touch it. Anecdotally, we've also had cases in Howard County where individuals were cleared of allegations of abuse towards children because of the presence of video evidence. This reduces the stigma of being blamed for a crime you didn't commit. It reduces the school's civil liability for suit, and it gives some degree of peace of mind to parents if they think something's wrong and they're able to confirm, oh, you know what, there isn't anything going on that's wrong. Finally, my reason for supporting this bill is that it has a funding provision. So it does not place, I think it's section K of the bill, it does not place the sole fiscal cost of implementing the cameras on the government, but also allows for fundraising to offset those costs. For all these reasons, I respectfully request a favorable report for House Bill 715. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. State's Attorney. Next, we have Dustin Bain.
Hi, yes, my name is Dustin Bain. I'm not aware, am I allowed to share my screen? Okay. So again, my name is Dustin Bain. My son is 7 years old and he is autistic and nonverbal. He attends Carroll Manor Elementary School in Frederick County. As some of you may be aware, between 2016 and 2019, there was major allegations against one of the special education teachers in Carroll Manor Challenges program while my son was attending there. Unfortunately, these allegations were by an aide, an adult in the classroom that witnessed it. But again, no charges could be found and prosecuted because that student cannot speak for himself about the abuse that he incurred. So my son during that time, this here is Ashton. And he came home with a bruise in the center of his back about the size of a fist, 4 inches tall, 2 inches wide. And you can see there's like a thumbprint on the top. You can also notice it's not on his spine that's protruding. If this was a fall, he would have had a bruise on his spine, but it's right beside the spine in the small of his back. To this day, I still have no idea what happened to him. No note from a health, no note from a nurse, no note from a teacher. He just shows up home with that bruise. I had a meeting with the administrator, principal, everyone, no answers. So I get the fear, the guilt, the shame every day that I send him to school of not knowing if he's being abused. And I don't have any other choices. I'm a single father, and he's owed a free and appropriate public education. Having to fear my child's safety sending him to school is not an appropriate public education. You know, the Catholic Church probably have great Catholic priests. The Boy Scouts probably have great Boy Scout troop leaders. But like the guy before me was saying, if we have children in places where there is no accountability, predators will prey on them. these cameras undoubtedly will prevent an attack on one of these children just by having accountability in that classroom. By not putting these cameras in the classroom, undoubtedly a new child will be abused, as is happening regularly across this country. Make no mistake, voting against these cameras in these classrooms where these children cannot speak for themselves is voting for the abuse of children, because it will occur again if we don't do something about it and protect our most vulnerable children. I vote favorably, or I'm speaking favorably in force of HB 715. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bain, and sorry for what your son experienced potentially in the classroom. Martha Moked?
Hi, yes. My name is Martha Moked, and I'd like to begin by thanking the Ways and Means Committee for hearing my testimony today. I'm testifying in support of House Bill 715, which would require each Board of Education in Maryland to install recording devices in special ed classrooms. I feel that it is critical to implement this law in order to protect special ed students, give their parents a way to receive answers when they believe an adverse incident has affected their child at school. While my child was in elementary school, I substituted in special education classrooms at their school for 2 years. I worked with some amazing teachers and instructional assistants who cared for the students with compassion and respect. But I also worked with some teachers and instructional assistants who did not. I witnessed one special education teacher, who Mr. Bain had spoke about in particular, along with an assistant in his classroom, who mistreated students in his class year after year, even after being told his behavior had been reported. There was no punishment for his treatment of these students, which included slapping and pulling them, yelling in their faces, using racial slurs, mocking them, withdrawing food, and threatening them with things he knew they were terrified of. Most of his students were nonverbal, and students who were verbal were not able to tell their parents about the way they were being treated due to the limitation of their verbal skills because of their autism. These were students in an elementary school who were 7 and 8-year-olds whose parents entrusted the school with their special needs children. They believed their children were being treated with kindness and compassion. I can't imagine being one of these students being treated this way and being unable to tell anyone. These children understand what is happening, but can't verbalize it. A small group of us, including several instructional assistants and parents, reported his behavior to Child Protective Services, the Sheriff Department, Frederick County Public Schools, and the Board of Education, and the Maryland Department of Education, but no one held this teacher accountable for his behavior towards these students. After an investigation and taking statements of 7 witnesses confirming this behavior, the superintendent made the final decision to leave him in the classroom. It has been, if there had been video footage, it could not have been denied. I was glad also to see that this law includes the placement of video recordings in special ed resource teachers' classrooms as well. If you're not aware, this is a classroom where, in some cases, special education students who have been mainstreamed go to a special education teacher to get special services. I believe if this bill is passed, it will give parents, school staff, and boards of education a tool to use should they feel something of concern has occurred with their child. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next signed up, we have Andrea Smedley Hasty.
Hello, my name is, and good afternoon, Madam Chair. Happy birthday, fellow Aquarian, and all the other members of the committee today. My name is Andrea Smedley Hasty. I am the grandmother of a 7.5-year-old autistic grandson by the name of Josiah Hasty. I am 80% of the time he's with me, I'm his caretaker. I am also his advocate. I am a retired Prince George's County firefighter and also retired from DC Public Charter Schools as a Dean of Discipline. When my grandson was diagnosed at age 3 with autism, we immediately started to try to find schools that would be a good placement for him. We put him in Prince George's County School, Wheatley Elementary School, where he started to come home with bruises and scratches and complaining. And after a while, he didn't even want to go to school. He fought me to even get out of the car. When I went to the school to ask what was going on, we were always told it was a classmate or what occurred in the pool. Josiah is verbal, unlike Mr. Bain's son. However, he cannot articulate the events of the day. So when asked, Josiah, what happened, he would script off of something else trying to explain it to us, but he could not explain it to us. So after one morning, I'm awakened by the news, and it's the school that Josiah is in, and a young lady who's in his classroom who was nonverbal, who was in a wheelchair, could barely move. It was one of the aides came to that she had been smacked in the face. And it's all over the news. And then we find out that there was a scandal the previous year where they had the children cleaning up urine, and they posted on YouTube. So Josiah was only 4. It wasn't legal for him to be in school. We snatched him out of the school and we sort of taught him at home. The following year, when it was time for him to go back to school, his grandfather is the vice principal at the National Christian Academy. We put him in that school with hopes that they would be able to accommodate him. But after about 6 weeks, they realized they didn't have the money or the resources to accommodate him. So we had to put him in public school. We put him in the neighborhood school where I requested that I attend school with him every day because I did not trust anyone in the Prince George's County public school system. We are still to date awaiting information on the incidents that happened to him within that school system. And so what ended up happening was I went to school with him every single day until my lawyer was finally able to get the county to pay for him to go to a private school. When he got to the private school, he went during the summer. There was a teacher that worked with me previously. He had a great summer, would get up, pack his own lunch. Then when the school year came, they switched teachers and put him in a different classroom. Josiah then came home again with bruises and scratches that were nobody could give answers to. We would even ask for a report, and the report would take 3 or 4 days. The last straw was when Josiah came home with what looked like someone, and the doctor, we actually took him to Bowie Health Center. I'm not sure if they can see. The doctor said that he was clawed. And so we again went to the school. Josiah didn't even want to go anywhere near the location of the school. His great grandparents lived in the location. He would fight us, he would scream, he would cry. And so I just hung around the school all day. I would sit in my car, I would park near his window of his classroom, and I just watched. But after the last incident where he was clawed, we removed him. We called our lawyers in, which we shouldn't have to do. Josiah still couldn't articulate what happened. And then we had to get a psychologist, and the psychologist, actually seeing a psychologist that helps him, like people that are scared of flying, they help him to go back into a school at all. Because
Ms. Smedley Hasty?
Yes.
I've given you an extra minute because
I'm sorry. Okay.
To make sure we all heard your story.
Yes, I'm very in favor of House Bill 715.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. To members from these first 4, are there any questions? All right. Thank you. Seeing none, let me keep calling on witnesses. We next have Celicia Brown. Is Ms. Brown here? Oh, I see you. You just need to go ahead.
Can you? Oh, hi, Madam Chair, everyone. Thank you for having me. I have a son. His name is Caleb Brown. He is autistic, and just like Ms. Hasty, he is verbal, but he has difficulty explaining what's happened throughout his day. My husband and I went on a vacation to celebrate our anniversary, and while we were gone, we got a phone call from his grandparents who were watching him at the time to say that there was an incident at school with him. An aide that was in the classroom with him cracked his knuckles. So when I got back from vacation, I did, contact the school to figure out what happened. And they told me that some of the adults in the room said that she did crack their knuckles. They did hear his knuckles actually crack. But then there was some who said that they didn't witness it at all. So they said that they did an internal investigation. They didn't bring anyone in from the outside. They did not call any officials or anything to come in and investigate. And while they were doing that investigation, she was still at the school working with other special needs children, just not directly in the classroom with Caleb. At this time, he was 9 years old. After their investigation of a week, they did decide that she could still keep her position. So she still worked at the school. However, Caleb would still see her throughout the day. It became difficult to get him. Every time it was time to tuck him in, he would tell me he didn't want to go to school tomorrow. Every morning when it was time to get on a bus, he would fight. He did not want to get on the bus. He had issues going to school every day after that. She still remained. The following school year, she began that school year, and then all of a sudden, she disappeared. Had it been cameras in that classroom, there wouldn't have been a discrepancy of whether or not she actually did crack his knuckles. I think that because it was teachers, some said they did, some said they didn't, they just decided to let her keep her position but work with other children. And I don't think that anyone who would physically put their hands on children should even be working with children at all. So I am in support of House Bill 715.
Thank you, and thank you as well for telling your story. Next, we have Rosemary Kitzinger.
Sorry, had to figure out the unmute button. Good afternoon. Happy birthday. I just celebrated 2 days ago my 25th anniversary of 25. So it's a good week for a birthday. I am a resident of Carroll County, and I am a mother of 4, 2 with disabilities. I am also co-owner of Bright Futures LLC. We are non-attorney special education advocates. I am in support of House Bill 715 for multiple reasons, and many obvious after hearing all the stories that are horrifying to me. My heart breaks for these families. I have worked with families as well of young children with autism. I have a daughter with autism, so I do understand. And some of the children I have worked with, these children have come home with scratches and bruises. They have defecated themselves. They have urinated on themselves. They're unable to tell, what has happened during the day, whether it was from a teacher, an aide, bite marks at times. It can be another student at times. It is horrifying as a parent when your child comes home with damages to their body and to their self-esteem and to their mental health, and they can't tell you why. And I think it is most important that we protect our most vulnerable children. I know in the past there was a lot of concern about putting cameras, in classrooms. I just want to point out there are many programs for special education students that already have cameras in the classrooms. So it's not that they don't exist at all. There are some in some counties. And also, I think it's important, at a time of a pandemic, and we've all been speaking from home and teaching from home, and there are cameras in all our homes, and our children are learning this way. I think we can put to rest any concerns we have about invasion of privacy, because we have now all learned to make it through this virtual time during this pandemic. I hope moving forward, we actually have more virtual opportunities. I'm asking you to support this bill. This is most important to protect these children and to protect staff as well. They are given unfounded claims at times as well. It's also a dynamic with the children that are in these classrooms. Sometimes they are not a good fit together. And that is something that has to be reviewed as well. So I ask for your support. I hope you enjoy the rest of your birthday this afternoon. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. We next have Ashley Van Cleef.
Good afternoon. I had the opportunity to share earlier that I am a former special education teacher, administrator, school system attorney, and now I'm an attorney that represents parents. And I'm here asking you to support this bill. This bill provides an opportunity to protect our most vulnerable students who cannot speak for themselves, but it also provides us that opportunity, as has been stated, to protect teachers. This bill is good for all of those that are involved. I've worked in special education programs where teachers were attacked, not because a student wanted to hurt the teacher, but because of something internal that's going on that the student can communicate with us. Our students who cannot communicate verbally what they need are going to communicate that through behaviors. In those situations, the teacher's trying to protect themselves, and then the student may also get injured. And when this happens, our students cannot come home and tell our families what happened, how they got those bruises, and our parents are desperate for those answers. I had a parent that just shared with me today that her child had had bruises and marks, and those marks that had happened years ago caused crying for years. That child refused to go into rooms because if door could be shut, they were scared. So we know there's long-lasting impacts that these events can happen, and we have to know more about what happened during these events to get our children help. As an administrator and a school system attorney, I also took these calls from desperate parents upset because their children had come home with unexplained bruises. As a parents attorney, I meet with countless parents each year who are dealing with this exact same situation. There's nothing worse than not knowing what's happened when a child has been injured. Whether you work for the school system or you're a parent, not knowing what's happened makes you feel desperate for those answers. The lack of information as to what has happened and how that child has been injured also pits our teachers and our parents against each other. It creates that lack of trust, and that also leads to more litigation, more meetings, more time wasted. It's unnecessary. I can imagine all of you at one point have felt that feeling of helplessness because you didn't know how to help a child that was crying, that was inconsolable, and they couldn't communicate to you what they needed. You become desperate. You probably tried giving them food or a bottle, rocking them, or if you were like me, taking them for a drive in the car. But they're just uncontrollably crying, and you are trying all you can to figure out what it is they need, and you feel utterly helpless and desperate for those answers. This is the position that our parents and administrators are in when a child is injured in school. We cannot figure out what has happened to them. Your support of this bill allows parents to find out what happened to their child. It allows the school and the teachers to figure out if they're being wrongfully accused. It allows administrators to take action that needs to take place. In my position, parents don't come to me because things are going well. They seek legal help because something terrible has happened to their child, or they suspect something terrible has happened to their child. I've had parents come to me with horrific pictures of bruises like you've seen today, with hospital reports, where the child is now so damaged emotionally that they can't return to a school building.
Ms. Van Cleef, can you wrap up, please?
Absolutely. So as we think about how we support our students, we've got to support our students and our teachers in these situations because it's never one that's good for either party. And I ask you to support this bill for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. We next have signed up Crystal Spradlin. Crystal, are you here? I don't see her. Oh, I do see her, but she's no video, no, still muted. We'll go to the next person, maybe come back to her if she's able to be here. Next, Guy Stephen.
Yes, and good afternoon. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm here to offer support for House Bill 715. I am a father of two amazing kids who attend school in Maryland. I also attended school in Maryland as well. I'm also the founder and executive director of a Maryland-based grassroots organization called the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I started the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint after my autistic son, Cooper, was inappropriately restrained and secluded a number of times while attending a Maryland public school. This should never have happened to my son. In fact, under the laws that were in place at the time and that are in place now, my son should never have been restrained and secluded. While he was not physically injured while he was restrained, he was severely traumatized, so much so that he was unable to return to school. And most of his 8th grade year was actually completed in what's called a home and hospital program. Today, he attends an amazing non-public school in the state, and he's doing really well. But Cooper was one of the lucky ones. Many are not so lucky, and you've heard some of those stories today. Children, teachers, and staff become traumatized and injured in response to challenging behaviors. Some students have even died due to the use of restraint. On April 29th of this past year, Cornelius Frederick, a young man at a school in Lakeside Academy in Michigan, threw a sandwich at another boy in a cafeteria. A staff member responded by tackling him to the ground and holding him there for 12 minutes. As a result, he eventually grew still, and 7 men worked to restrain him in a face-down restraint. He died 2 days later in the hospital. The incident was captured on camera, and the medical examiner ruled it a homicide. The result being that he was asphyxiated due to this. There are far better ways to work with kids, even those that may have challenging behaviors. I think we'd all agree that behavior is communication, and sometimes it's a primary means of communication. We were fortunate that our son was able to come home and tell us what happened to him at school, but not all students can come home and talk about their day. Non-speaking students and students with intellectual or developmental disabilities may not have the verbal ability to share what happens to them during their school day. This puts students at really an increased risk of mistreatment and even abuse. While I don't think that may be the intention, that is the result sometimes. And even those children that can verbally communicate, they may not. Children often assume that their parents know everything that happens to them throughout their day at school. They also feel like if they're restrained, secluded, or have some kind of maltreatment, they often feel like they're in trouble. They don't want to come home and tell their parent or caregiver, hey, I got in trouble today. They feel shame, guilt, like they're a bad kid, and may not want to share what happened. A parent's only indication might be escalating behaviors at home. Suddenly their child doesn't want to go to school. I heard somebody say that earlier. Avoidance is a really big sign that there's something going on. So anyway, we've got to remember behaviors communication. Cameras can provide a voice for kids that need to be heard and deserve to be heard. So I'm here today to support House Bill 715. I believe we can and must do better for students, teachers, and staff in our schools across the state. I believe the cameras in our self-contained special education classrooms can provide necessary accountability and oversight and a voice for children that need it. Yep, I know it's not the answer for everything, but I want to thank you for your time today to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. We do still have a few more people testifying. Any questions for the last 4 who spoke? Just scrolling back to my list. Seeing none, I'll take the next 3 that are in favor and then 1 unfavorable. Again, going back to Crystal Spradlin. Can you turn on your camera? All right, she's not able to connect, but she's seemingly here. Go on to the next person, Lori Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday. I just wanted to show the committee Cassidy. It's really unfortunate that we're not in person because unfortunately we can't bring our children to say hello, but Cassidy is an
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Please, Miss Scott, please join. I think Miss Spradlin tried jumping in, but we'll come back to her. Miss Scott.
Okay, sounds good. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. And I wanted to say to Rich Gibson, if he's still here, congratulations on your new president of the Maryland States Attorneys Association, Rich. The reason that I'm here today is because Cassie's in an adaptive life skill program in her home school. And unfortunately, about 2 years ago, there was an aide who pushed an autistic child into a group of desks. When that happened, it took a couple days for the paras and the teachers in the class to report it, and 5 days for the school system to notify the parents. The child was removed from the classroom, went to another school. The aide was suspended. When the aide came back to work, she became my daughter's aide. And since I already knew of this incident, I had a meeting with the principal and vice principals that helped me kind of understand why she's back. And they said the union came in, helped support her, and needless to say, in a week, she was gone. Videos can be a fact finder for our non-verbal kids. We know they are not all the answers, but without cameras that can be viewed when these allegations are reported, it takes days, weeks, and months sometimes to investigate, and then we still may not know the whole story. Cameras are our eyes. We need in there if a student is being mistreated. This footage can also be used to convict someone who has harmed a child. We have cameras on cops for this very reason, to tell both stories. This year in our legislation, we have a bill coming up to require police departments to utilize body cameras by all police departments utilize body cameras by January 2025. And this bill is no different to protect the most vulnerable, powerless school constituents that we have in our school buildings. We have cameras in hallways, we have cameras outside, we have cameras in vestibules, audio and video capabilities on our school buses. We have cameras in stores to deter theft. We have them on our doorbells and many public places. So per my written testimony, I did want to just say that most of the kids that are in these segregated self-contained classrooms are only about 1% of the school population that are on the alternative track. So it is a very small number. It's not like every child is going to be educated in this self-contained classroom. This is for our most vulnerable kids. If this bill passes this year, we will be one of 4 states that has this video surveillance bill with very similar language to protect our most vulnerable school constituents, our nonverbal or limitedly verbal students, predominantly educated in a specific space. Because these children cannot speak up for themselves or report abuse, video recordings in this classroom can assist in investigations when there's suspected abuse. Any one of these stories you heard today is one too many. Please support this bill for the sake of our most vulnerable kids. Cameras are a student's voice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go back to Ms. Crystal Spradlin.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I, for some reason, cannot get my video to work. It tells me host has stopped it. I'm not sure why, but you can hear me though.
Yes, we can. Please continue.
Okay, so I am in support of House Bill 715. My son is a 9-year-old. He is essentially a Frederick County Public student, but he is at the Strawbridge School in Baltimore County as a alternative placement assigned by Frederick County Public Schools. When my son was in 2nd grade, he spent more than 89 hours in restraint and seclusion in just his first term of, here's my video, now it's letting me, now it's working. In just his first term in 2nd grade. It was very hard for them to establish any sort of antecedents. My son gets ABA therapy as well. If we would have had cameras in the classroom, not only could we have been able to see what the antecedents were and been able to establish a plan for an IEP and a BIP to be able to make sure that these things didn't happen. My son, after that 2nd grade year, was then transferred. That was at a pyramid program through Frederick County. He was transferred to the Foundation School of Montgomery County, where from day one, he was abused pretty severely there while he was there, to the point where I told him because of a hospitalization that we had to have. A police report was filed. They wouldn't follow up on it. They took the school's word. They wouldn't even hear me out. He came home with really, really bad bruises, scratches down his arms that were bleeding when he got on the bus. To this day, I really don't know what happened because he can't articulate to me what happened. He is verbal, but he doesn't understand what's happening and that it's wrong what's happening to him. If there were cameras in these classrooms, it would help these students, it would help the teachers, it would help the parents all to understand why these things are happening to these kids and try and help them from happening in the future and to develop a plan with the school system and therapists. My son suffers from PTSD from things that have happened to him in his classrooms since the 2nd grade, and it's very hard to deal with. So I am very much in favor of the House Bill 715. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for sharing your story. Sorry what your son experienced. The next person we have signed up is India Oaks.
Good afternoon. India Oaks speaking in support of House Bill 715. I could come here as a legal advocate who has written for over a decade about violence against people with disabilities and rattle off all the statistics I cited in my written testimony, showing how people with disabilities have the highest rates of abuse and are the most underreported of any of the legally defined categories of hate crimes. But I wanted to bring a different perspective to the vulnerability kids with disabilities face. I am one of the lucky ones, never being subject to physical abuse, and as someone born with a bit too much self-confidence and no significant mobility issues, I was able to find ways to communicate for myself and handle the bullying and discrimination from both peers and teachers. And I know sitting here, you show a respect for me that you give all who take time to testify, but the reality is, that is not how others perceive me. Many only see my disability and dismiss me, whether it is a worker at McDonald's who won't take my order, over 200 employers who saw I couldn't talk clearly and quickly forgot all the qualifications worthy to call me in for an interview, a worker at a train station who literally said to another person, right in front of me, "This is why I got a vasectomy, so I wouldn't have things like that." Or just last night, when my messages in the Zoom chat were ignored during a workshop on implicit bias of all things. These incidents don't represent the extent of the abuse special education kids face, but my point in sharing is how, even a 45-year-old adult as intelligent and functional as myself, faces such biased treatment on a daily basis because of my disability. As a parent, I've seen students in my son's school degraded by educators who refuse to provide evidence of their accusations. And as an advocate, I have seen authority figures around the world not only ignore physical abuse of children with disabilities, but in some places, encourage it. I do ask you try to work on Maryland law to include audio for verbal and emotional abuse. In closing, the budget for cameras cannot be given priority over protecting our most vulnerable kids from abuse or death, so please support House Bill 715, ensuring access to video evidence, not only to provide credibility to what our kids say, but even more importantly, to hold assailants responsible when our kids have no ability to say anything at all. Thank you.
Oaks, thank you for your heartfelt testimony, and sorry about the stories that you were telling. I know that really made a reaction with a lot of the members of the committee. Are there any questions for any of the last three who have spoken? I want to thank you all very much. We want to move to one person signed up and favorable for the bill. We have Diana Bergman.
Feliz cumpleaños. I would like to start off by saying, Delegate Guyton, I do respect you for changing a lot of the language compared to last year's language. However, I agree with Delegate Eversole. There are some questions that I have that I'm alarmed with regarding the current language of the legislation for House Bill 715. I want to start off by quoting. I want you to realize we have tragedies every day, Black families, said 58-year-old Stephen Waltz. Stephen Waltz is the father of Stephen Waltz, who was diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 9 and was shot dead by Coleman City cops at the age of 15 years old. There is language in this bill that provides the SRO and law enforcement access. It's on line 17 on page 4 to these video footage. There are a lot of children on the autism spectrum, like my son, that are unjustly charged criminally and abused, especially if they don't have a voice. they get disciplined. Baltimore County Public Schools recently ended up doing, they did a study, and it came back, the audit came back, over 80% of our Black and brown students and children with disability in Baltimore County Public Schools are being suspended. And things have changed. Things have changed in the self-inclusion class. They share the learning environment. My son is in one of those classes. He's a middle schooler. The other student in his class is certificate bound and he's diploma bound, but they share the same environment. And I have experience where he was inappropriately restrained. But there's a lot of technical things here that gives access to the Board of Education. Our Board of Education last night were having a discussion and they didn't know the difference between IDEA and ADA requirements and regulations. Eric Ebersol had asked about that safe contained space of the classroom. And on page 2, they have defined is inclusion areas. And we don't have those anymore. We got rid of those. We don't have focus rooms in Baltimore County. We got rid of our padded rooms that we used to have. And when my son's having a meltdown and he's nonverbal and he's having a meltdown to self-regulate himself and calm himself, that is a private moment. So I think we need to go back and look at this bill and look at the unintended consequences. There are things we have to fix for our children before looking at technology to watch people, especially technology that could be used as evidence. Because on line 28, the video recording could be used as evidence against a child, a teacher, an educator. And we need to spend our resources where it really matters. We need to spend our resources to correct a lot of things to make sure that our children, our Black and brown students, and our children with disability are not disappropriately disciplined and punished because of their challenges. So I want to find balance with the legislation. And yes, our police officers have cameras, but they have audio in those cameras so you could hear back and forth what's happening, and there is nothing taken out of context. We don't even do that. I participate in the multi-year plan that we have in Baltimore County. We don't even build our schools the way we used to. The open spaces, the learning environments are multi-purpose rooms is how we're used. They're transparent. They create this openness feeling to help students with sensory noises. A lot of our school buildings do not look like we used to. A lot of things we know don't work, we no longer have available on the books. So think carefully about the decisions you make and those unintended consequences so we don't harm our children. We want to be able to do things that is not used as evidence to go back and forth and argue in litigation. We want to be able to provide actual trained professionals to help our students with disabilities that have challenges where they can't communicate. So I look forward, and again, like I said, Delegate Guyton, I respect you very much, and I look forward to continue working on this and reshaping this legislation as it moves forward in years to come, but it has to meet the needs of today, is what I would like to share. Thank you
Ms.
very
Bergman,
much.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Bergman? All right, thank you. Seeing none, we are done with the hearing on House Bill 715. We'll move to our last bill, House Bill 714. Delegate Guyton.
I apologize, Madam Chair. You'd think I'd be good at this by now, but I forgot to turn on my microphone. Happy birthday once again, and I'm going to make this quick for y'all because it's been a long day and I appreciate all of your attention and support for these bills. I'm here presenting for my last bill of the day, House Bill 714, which is an emergency bill. It's an emergency, I'm sorry, it's not an emergency bill, I'll take that back. Emergency preparedness bill to support special education students in the event of a prolonged school closure for any reason. So this year we learned what worked and what didn't for special education students, but mostly we learned that a prolonged lapse between school closure and the provision of special education services is problematic, both to student success and to parent-school partnerships. So this bill requires that IEP teams work together with parents and guardians to discuss the best ways to deliver services in the event of a school emergency. And we've covered every emergency we could think of in this bill based on their observations during the current prolonged shutdown, and to record these while they are fresh. There are several amendments to this bill that I've shared with Delegate Eversole. You don't have in front of you, but it really simplifies the bill. So basically what I just said, they need to meet with the parents and talk about what worked and what didn't for the student and record that. No provision in this bill supersedes the student's IEP. So I want to make that very, very clear. And we have added that as an amendment to make some of the advocates more comfortable. And then a big addition is that within 10 days of a school closure, for any reason, parents and guardians should receive a plan from the school that indicates how the student's IEP will be fulfilled during the school closure. Parents and guardians should have the right then to provide feedback to the proposed delivery model. And that was suggested by several of our advocates, and you can read their testimony. And this advanced planning directive will provide an educational input from everyone involved that will make the transition to non-traditional education more seamless and less contentious if it is ever necessary in the future. And we did add a provision for cyber attack to this bill as well, because that's where we believe some of our major threats are going to occur. Thank you very much for your support for House Bill 714.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. Any questions for Delegate Guyton? All right, thank you very much. We'll go for the first person testifying. We have Lori Scott.
Hi, good afternoon again, Madam Chair, and happy birthday. And thank you, Delegate Guyton, for bringing these bills forward. We appreciate your voice. So I just want to share, I really do appreciate the amendments. I think that would be a great addition to the bill. And I want to let the committee know that early on in the closure of schools, we did get a continuing of learning plan. In the spring, what happened was the one that came from the county only had 6 goals and 6 objectives for Cassidy, who's in the ALS program and has a 65-page IEP. So obviously that is not fake. So fast forward to the fall, we got an alternative service delivery model, which did have more aspects of her IEP and was better. However, no one called me, talked to me, no one asked questions whether or not I had some input on what might be helpful for her in the virtual environment. So I think this is really an important bill so that we can have discussion with the teams about, do I need a desk? Can I have manipulatives? Do I have a remote, access here? Does she have an iPad that she can use? All of those things would have set her up for success just from having the conversation about really what does she need in a virtual or hybrid environment. So I think it's really important that that families have input, just like we do in the IEP. We shouldn't get a document that says this is how we're gonna, educate her during the time of the pandemic. So proactive planning and intentional inclusion of parents at the table in advance can and will enhance the virtual and hybrid learning and minimize potential compensatory service payouts. And I think this bill stands for itself. So thank you for allowing me to speak again. Good night.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Invite the next person up, Megan Mulvana.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Thank you. So I work with families, a number of different districts in Maryland, and I am also in favor of the bill. I have seen a variety of responses. I think some were a little more thoughtful and orchestrated. I think there was a lot of hesitation from districts to do almost anything, but I definitely echo the need for more collaboration. I mean, I could imagine more town halls, some coffee and conversation with parents. I think instead of the districts almost being kind of paralyzed with some fear of doing anything or doing the wrong thing, what they could have done was open up some conversation and really get families' input. And I think if they had done that early on, I do think there would have been a more appropriate service delivery. And so the accommodations to learning plans is definitely an issue. I don't think there was as much thought as to how this virtual learning would accommodate some students with some significant disabilities. students on the autism spectrum, students with mobility issues, and definitely a lot more need for low-tech materials. So what kinds of resources could be sent to homes, could be delivered to children so that they had the resources they need to be able to access the virtual learning. So I'm in favor of the bill because I do think that communication and that collaboration with families would definitely have head off some significant regression for some students.
Thank you so very much. And Andy Culp.
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Andy Culp, and I'm the Executive Director of the ARC Maryland, and we're here in support of House Bill 714 with amendments as proposed by the sponsor. We began getting calls a few months into the pandemic from parents that were struggling to support their children with disabilities in virtual learning. In the beginning, within a few weeks, educators implemented a modified learning plan for special ed students, and these modified plans indicated the students' most critical learning needs. It was that one pager that Lori showed a minute ago, and how the needs would be addressed. But it's important to note a couple of things here. First, on March 20th, 2020, the U.S. Department of Ed issued guidance to schools and confirmed that students with disabilities were still entitled to FAPE, otherwise known as a free and appropriate public education that they get through the IDEA, and that right would not be waived under the emergency circumstances. And the second thing that I'd like to note is that when these modified learning plans were developed, that parents had little, if any, input, buy-in, or decision-making regarding the development of the modified plan. Many of them, if not all, replaced in-person related services with consultative services, and in a lot of cases, those consultative services were dramatically cut back. And the most disturbing stories involved children who had just reached important milestones, like speaking 3-word sentences, who stopped talking completely in the absence of those necessary supports. Other parents talk about how it would have been good to have school equipment and other tools like positioning chairs and bolsters to support their child's virtual learning from home to access their individual plan of education. So now we're close to 11 months since the pandemic started, and so we have that experience under our belts that I hope we can use to learn from this unfortunate experience and do better for our children for the future. The bill would require the team have this critical conversation at the time of the child's next IEP meeting about what's needed for the student to access their individualized education plans, because we're mindful of the time constraints of teachers, and this is an effort to not add additional work to the school team. So the emergency planning component of the IEP would be developed by the members of the child's individual planning team at that next scheduled plan date. The bill is also modeled after California legislation that passed in June of this last year. It was Senate Bill 98 in California, which amended their Education Code Section 56345A9A. So in closing, we believe that we can and should do this for our students in Maryland, and we respectfully ask for a favorable report from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Culp. And our last witness in favor is Mr. James Winston, with what seems like a mini James Winston, Rico Winston next to him. And I have to say that young man has more patience and probably less fidgeting than every single member of this committee. So I'd like to congratulate him on his attention and staying power. Go ahead, Mr. Winston.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Wow. And so
Good afternoon,
well.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and distinguished committee members. And hello, Andy Culp. It's a pleasure to see you. I'm the single father of an amazing little 11-year-old boy who has autism. And his name is Israel, sitting right beside me. He also has an IEP, of course, and he attends school in the Baltimore City public school system. When the pandemic hit, it just took his education. First, it was in a tailspin, and then was followed by a straight nosedive. And one thing that HB 714 would provide, it would be pre-planning, is essential and critical for my son's development and our children. Scripture says that those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. HB 714 would be a safety net so that past year's failure when it comes to academic development of children such as myself, my son Israel, who has an IEP, it will be, those past failures won't be it won't be followed by next year. So it can be an end to that. So those fairs won't have to be a repeat. So we are definitely in favor of HB 714.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I also want to say that virtual school has been really difficult for me. The school hasn't prepared me for virtual learning.
So he's actually used to love and enjoy going to school. Of course, that setting, that social interaction, which is key, but the school system neglected to prepare him with the computer skills. And I'm not a paraeducator, I'm not a teacher. So he actually has developed anxiety anytime it's time to sit in front and perform virtual school. So this is something that definitely would benefit all children for IEPs and be a support of their families as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Israel, thank you. It's always great to see a smart young man, and we're glad you were able to join us today.
Thank you.
Any questions for any of the panelists who just offered testimony? If not, we'll move on to John Willems in opposition to the legislation.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, John Willems, representing the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. I would refer you to our written testimony, and look, it's the end of the day, and in light of the compelling testimony from Rico and his father, I'm inclined to say that we will be much more favorably inclined to the bill once we see Delegate Guyton's amendments, because most of our concerns, as she is well aware, would be around the rigidity of building in an IEP plus that would be subject to some of the same due process complaint provisions and the formal legal tendrils that extend from expanding what is already an extensive IEP. But I will say I've been participating on nationwide calls of school attorneys since the pandemic and the shutdown. And if an attorney, particularly with special education experience, said anything over and over again, it was talk to your parents. And so I'm also inclined to apologize on behalf of any school system or individual who failed to do that, because that was emphasized as critically needed at this time, to just demonstrate the compassion that we're not able to fulfill every letter of the IEP in the extraordinary circumstance of the shutdown, but to have parents feel that they are being engaged and really respected through the challenges that they're now facing as home educators of children with special education needs. So it's a very serious issue, and look forward to working with the sponsor and the committee and the subcommittee on this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willems, and thank you again, young Mr. Winston, for being here and being just the best advocate. As always, adults don't realize, but children always do a much better job conveying all the right arguments. So thank you for that. Are there any questions for Mr. Willems? Seeing none, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 714 and done with our hearing for today. I wanted to see if members had any announcements in regard to their subcommittees coming up.
Madam Chair, local revenues will have a meeting tomorrow at 12:45. Should be about 5 minutes, one bill to go over.
Okay, local revenues 12:45. Anybody else? Delegate Wilkins.
Yes, Madam Chair, election law will meet tomorrow immediately after floor. We have 2 bills to consider, and just asking everyone to be in front of your computers as quickly as possible immediately after floor tomorrow.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Racing and Gaming will meet, the subcommittee will meet on Friday, February the 12th at 11:30. We have 1 bill.
Thank you so much. Delegate Ebersol.
Just for a matter of information, early childhood will not meet until early next week.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Education Subcommittee will meet tomorrow. We said 12:45, but Daryl Barnes is messing us all up. So 1 o'clock will probably work for all of us.
That's what I
I have 1 o'clock on my calendar for you already, so I guess I was
Okay.
reading your
Good.
mind.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And then uncertain when we will be meeting as a full committee, given all that, possibly Friday afternoon after the other subcommittee. I think waiting to see how many bills we get done on the floor tomorrow between the likely 2 sessions and the need for that session on Friday. So stay tuned for timing for full committee, and otherwise I will see you all later. Thanks for all the good wishes. It's been a pleasure spending
Happy
my
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Birthday!
Thanks. I was able to see my mom today. My expired license, I was able to get my eyes examined at Target between all my Zoom calls today, and Nancy's picking up the baby, so we're gonna get to play for